Hey detectives, welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Cassidy Stay. Stephen Stay was born on April 30, 1975, in Riverside County, California, as the youngest child of Thomas and Joyce Stay. His parents owned a 20-acre orange farm, where he worked from a young age. They taught him important values, including a work ethic and respect for family. Like his parents, he regularly attended church. Katie, born on October 6, 1979, was the eldest of Roger and Kelly Leon's 5 children. In her free time, she enjoyed crafting and became highly skilled at it. Stephen and Katie met in 2003 while attending Clearfield High School in Clearfield, Utah. They were described by everyone around them as friendly, kind, and considerate. They quickly became close friends and began dating. 3 years later, in 2006, they married and had 5 children. In 2009, they moved to Houston to be closer to Katie's parents and brothers, who also lived in Texas at the time. After settling there, Stephen took on the role of chairman of the elders, a group of ministers responsible for overseeing the church's spiritual matters. They devoted their lives to the church and raising their children. Despite living in Houston for only a few years, they quickly earned the affection of their neighbors, thanks to their warm and friendly nature. Katie, who loved family life, often shared her thoughts and experiences with her sisters, especially Melanie. She mentioned to Melanie that she and the children enjoyed listening to the song Etel. The family's religious values were deeply ingrained, and their family siblings are well-behaved and harmonious, rarely causing any trouble. By 2014, their family had grown to 7 members. Stephen, 39 years old at the time, ran his own real estate agency, while Katie, 34, managed an online jewelry store. Together, they raised their 5 children, 15 years old Cassidy, 13 years old Brian, 11 years old Emily, 9 years old Rebecca, and their youngest, 4 years old Zachary. Cassidy loved reading and always looked out for her younger siblings. Brian is an active person with a passion for music and computers. Emily sang in a choir, enjoyed singing, and collected items related to the popular children's character Hello Kitty. Rebecca is hyperactive and never sits still. Zachary, the youngest brother in the family, loves superheroes and often watches Hello Kitty videos with his sister. On July 9, 2014, Stephen and Katie went out to take care of some business at the bank, leaving the children at home. Cassidy, who had always been responsible for looking after her younger siblings, was left in charge. Around 5:30 p.m., someone rang the doorbell at their home on 711 Leaflet Lane. Cassidy opened the door, unaware of the danger. She did not recognize the man standing there, Ronald Haskell, her Aunt Melanie's ex-husband. His appearance brought a real nightmare to the family. Ronald Haskell was born on August 26, 1980, and grew up in California. His parents were members of the local Orthodox Church. During his teenage years, the family relocated. As an adult, he worked various jobs, but never stayed in one place for long. On March 15, 2002, he married Melanie, and they moved to Utah. Outwardly, their relationship appeared ideal. Ronald considers himself a good husband, but in reality, it is not. Melanie recounted that their marriage was like a nightmare, with Ronald regularly harassing and abusing her. In 2008, an especially horrific incident occurred. Ronald pulled Melanie's hair, dragged her out of bed and around the house in front of her children, then beat her. After this incident, she bravely sued him for domestic violence. However, he pleaded for forgiveness, promising to change, and she chose to believe him, withdraw the lawsuit. Although they continued to live together for several more years, Ronald did not keep his promise. On the contrary, he continued to show his violent nature. In July 2013, after several serious incidents of domestic violence, Melanie decided to leave Ronald and take the children with her. This time, she took the necessary legal steps to protect herself and the children, as she felt Ronald was a danger. She filed for a restraining order to prevent him from approaching her. A month later, she formally filed for divorce. By October of that year, the two parties had reached a custody agreement. Accordingly, custody of the child was awarded to Melanie. After divorce, Melanie sought support from her sister Katie. On February 14, 2014, Katie traveled to Utah, helped Melanie and her children, relocated them to Houston. Alan, a former friend of Ronald, recalled that he seemed to lose control after Melanie left. According to Alan, losing custody of their 4 children was a huge shock to him. In a conversation with reporters, Alan shared that when Ronald walked out of the courthouse after the divorce proceedings, he saw Melanie happy, smiling and chatting comfortably with her relatives. He could not understand why she was so happy. He affirmed that he still loved her and never wanted a divorce. However, in contrast to that feeling, Melanie felt relieved after 11 years of suffering violence and abuse, which made Ronald extremely angry. By January 2014, Ronald was working as a FedEx delivery man. To those around him, he appeared lonely, lost, and miserable. However, this was actually a cover for a cold, calculated plan. He moved to California to be closer to his parents and cut off all contact with his friends in Utah, where his family had fallen apart. In California, he lived with his parents, Carl and Jane Haskell. There, he began plotting revenge against those he believed had hurt him. Obsessed with hatred for Melanie and the relatives who supported her during the divorce, he began hoarding weapons and large amounts of ammunition. His anger grew until he could no longer control himself. Ronald's biological mother, Carl, also suffered at the hands of her son. On July 2, 2014, his mother filed a protective order, claiming that he had dragged her into the garage during an argument, then duct-taped her to a chair for 4 hours. He also threatened to kill his entire family, including her grandchildren, because they had kept in touch with Melanie. She also said that Ronald had attacked his father, Jane, who was disabled and confined to a wheelchair. Police attempted to arrest him, but he escaped and was placed on the wanted list. His actions clearly showed how dangerous he was, daring to harm even his elderly parents. At the time, no one knew that he had fled to another state. Unfortunately, by the time his whereabouts were determined, it was too late. On July 9, 2014, the doorbell rang at the Houston home of Melanie's sister, Katie. Katie's daughter, Cassidy, opened the door to find a man dressed in a FedEx delivery uniform. He was strongly built, with red hair and a thick beard. He asked Cassidy about her parents. Not recognizing him initially, she responded that her mom and dad weren't home. Wanting to be thorough, she decided to fetch paper and a pencil to jot down the courier's details for her parents. When Cassidy returned, the man introduced himself as Ronald Haskell. That's when she realized who he was. Her Aunt Melanie's ex-husband, the man responsible for so many past troubles. Frightened, she tried to shut the door, but he forced his way inside. He drew his weapon and displayed a makeshift silencer made from a pillowcase and tape. At first, Ronald appeared calm and said he was looking for his ex-wife, Melanie. He asked Cassidy about Melanie's whereabouts, but she doesn't respond. He then asked her to gather her siblings in the living room and leave the TV on. She thought this might distract her younger siblings, but his true intentions were extremely horrible. He made the children lie on the floor in a row, threatening to tie them up if they didn't comply. Terrified, they obeyed. Cassidy was overwhelmed with fear. Convinced that Ronald intended to kill them, she tried to talk to him, to convince him not to harm her siblings. She repeated the names and ages of each child, hoping that it would change his mind, and prayed continuously. But Ronald only responded with an evil laugh. After some time, Stephen and Katie returned home. The moment Katie entered the house and saw Ronald, she was filled with despair. She knew all too well how dangerous he could be. Ronald claimed that he had come to take Melanie and his children away. He then ordered everyone to lie down on the floor. Realizing his sinister intentions, Katie tried to protect her family, rushing at him with screams and fists. However, her efforts were in vain. He attacked her in the face, killing her instantly. Then he also killed Stephen. Cassidy, hearing Ronald approach, covered her head with her hands, pressed her face to the floor, and screamed hysterically. A sudden explosion rang out. His bullet hit her finger and grazed her head without damaging her brain. She tried not to move, lying still on the floor pretending to be dead, while continuing to pray. At this point, Ronald continued to commit the crime. Cassidy could not move but realized that a terrible tragedy was happening in the house. He coldly murdered all the children without mercy. When it was Zachary's turn, the boy panicked and took a bullet in the shoulder. The boy ran to his father, Stephen, but he did not know that his father was dead. Then, Ronald moved closer and opened fire again. In total, Ronald used 13 bullets, ensuring no one survived. It was later discovered that only 6 of the bullets were fatal. After reloading, he drove to Melanie's parents' house. As soon as he heard the car leave, Cassidy jumped up. Shocked and injured, she still tried her best to run to the phone to call for help. Cassidy told the operator that Uncle Ronald had killed her entire family. She also revealed that he was currently driving to the city of Leon, heading to her grandparents' house, where her Aunt Melanie and her cousins lived. An ambulance was immediately dispatched to the scene. When the medical team arrived, Cassidy was conscious, and one of her younger brothers, Zachary, was still alive but gravely injured. Tragically, the boy passed away on the way to the hospital. News of the horrific attack quickly spread throughout the area, and 12 patrol cars were deployed to track down the killer, Ronald. Cassidy played a key role in his capture, providing a detailed description of him and sharing information about the stolen family car. Later that day, around 7:00 p.m., Ronald stopped his car to buy a drink. He had a list of 22 more people he intended to kill. Consumed by rage, he purchased 200 additional cartridges. However, before he could carry out his plan, the police intercepted him on the highway. The funeral for Cassidy's parents and siblings took place on July 16, 2014, at the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. 6 white coffins, adorned with pink and purple flower arrangements, were lined up, holding the bodies of Stephen, Katie, Brian, Emily, Rebecca, and Zachary. A photograph of each victim was displayed in front of their respective coffin. About 100 people attended the funeral, and colorful balloons were released into the sky to remember each victim. Cassidy kept her faith in herself and consoled herself that her dearest ones were now in a better place and enjoy the peaceful life in the afterlife. To the local community, she became a symbol of bravery. During the chaos of the bloody massacre, she remained composed, contacted emergency services, and managed to save the rest of her family from death. Though the tragedy claimed lives, her quick thinking prevented even greater loss. In her speech, Cassidy said that her life had changed completely and would never be the same again. Through tears, she spoke of her loved ones. They had gone and were resting in heaven, but she believed that one day she would see them again. During the ceremony, Cassidy's aunts and uncles spoke, recalling that Stephen was passionate about drumming and that Zachary could cheer up everyone around him with just a smile. They described their deceased loved ones as people full of love, leaving an irreplaceable void in their hearts. The service was led by Scott McBride, a representative of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. His words about guardian angels and how Cassidy would never be alone brought tears to the eyes of those gathered. After the ceremony, reporters asked the Stay family's relatives about the incident. Thomas, the father of Stephen and grandfather of the children, gave an interview explaining that Ronald had decided to harm the entire family. Thomas mentioned that they had known for a long time that Ronald was mentally unstable, yet they had accepted him. Stephen's mother said that since he was little, Ronald often came to play with her children and attended happy parties. However, she thought that there must be some problem inside him that he could commit such a terrible crime. In 2019, 5 years after the tragedy, Ronald's trial began. Cassidy is forced to testify against her uncle, who had been accused of killing her family members. Her testimony moved everyone in the courtroom to tears. With deep pain in her voice, she described the overwhelming smell of blood in the living room and the sour taste in her mouth. She spoke of how the house, once filled with joy, had become dark and suffocating. Cassidy described in detail the horrifying experience she endured. She still clearly remembers the moment Ronald took the lives of her parents and siblings. Lauren Bart, a representative from the prosecutor's office, characterized Ronald as a manipulative and heartless man. She ultimately labeled him a monster who sought revenge on everyone who had supported his ex-wife, Melanie. Sergeant Ron Hickman, testifying for the prosecution, explained that based on his extensive professional experience, the crime was premeditated, carried out methodically, and without hesitation. He added that in his 40 years of service, he had never encountered a tragedy as horrific as the one that befell the Stay family. Defending Ronald, a man who attacked a defenseless family without causing any harm to himself, was an incredibly difficult task for the defense. The defense's sole argument was that Ronald suffered from psychological issues. After his imprisonment, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. He himself admitted that the voices in his head urged him to kill the Stay family. However, the prosecutor's office rejected this argument, asserted that he had a tendency towards violence. During his marriage to Melanie, he was not only abusive to her, but also to his children. In addition, the prosecutor emphasized that he was also cruel to his elderly parents, including his father, who was disabled. Lawyer Samantha highlighted to the judges how much time Ronald spent planning the crime. She explained that he purchased weapons, ammunition, and hid them at his parents' house to carry out the murders of Melanie, his children, and anyone who had helped Melanie leave him. Samantha described him as a manipulative individual who had no intention of changing. The jury deliberated for over 4 hours to determine Ronald's level of guilt and decide whether he deserved life imprisonment without parole or the death penalty. Ultimately, he was found guilty of first-degree murder of all his family members and attempted murder. The jury recommended the death penalty, rejecting the defense's argument that Ronald was insane. They declared him an extremely dangerous individual who posed a threat to society. During the hearing, prosecutor Kim Hawk urged the judge to impose the death penalty, calling it a fair punishment for someone who meticulously planned and carried out the brutal murder of the Stay family. Kim Hawk argued that Ronald did not deserve to live. On October 11, 2019, 39 years old Ronald Haskell listened to the verdict without showing any emotion. Dressed in a blue suit that would soon be replaced by a prison uniform, he remained silent as the court sentenced him to death. During her speech, Cassidy once again faced Ronald, the man who had tried to kill her and her loved ones. Even though he was only 10 feet away, fear still gripped her. But this time, he had no weapon. Now 20 years old, Cassidy was determined to speak the truth about what had happened. She wore a purple jacket, symbolizing the fight against domestic violence, and attended the trial. Summoning her courage, she stepped up to the microphone and, with a trembling voice, asked Ronald if he felt anything for her. if he had even a shred of remorse in his soul. Cassidy didn't want to believe it, but when the court heard that Ronald felt no remorse and was pretending to be mentally ill to avoid responsibility, something shifted within her. She admitted she didn't know how to handle the overwhelming pain consuming her because, until then, she had always viewed the world with kindness and tenderness. Now she was forced to confront a deep and inexpressible sorrow. One of the most striking moments of her speech was when she directly addressed Ronald. She admitted that she had hoped he would repent, but that never happened. Despite this, she expressed her hope that God would help her heal, guide her through the aftermath, and ease her suffering. Cassidy respected the jury's decision but felt the punishment did not match the gravity of the crime. Ultimately, she no longer cared whether Ronald acknowledged his guilt. She chose to move forward with her life, embracing joy, facing challenges head-on, and striving to forget the horrors he inflicted. The Stay family murders were a heartbreaking tragedy for all who knew them. Meanwhile, Ronald's parents, Carl Vaughn, were deeply shaken by their son's crimes. Cassidy, now a college student in Utah, has started a new life and started a family of her own. She does not allow herself to sink into despair or give up, but lives with purpose and hope, always looking toward the future. The case of Abigail Hernandez. Abigail Hernandez, commonly known as Abby, was born on October 12, 1998, in Manchester, New Hampshire, USA. She was the second child of her parents, Rubens Hernandez and Xenia. The family had a happy life for many years, but eventually her parents decided to divorce. After the divorce, Abigail and her older sister Sarah moved in with their mother, who worked as a nurse. From a young age, Abigail showed many positive traits. Those who knew her described her as kind, curious, cheerful, and adventurous. She first explored the world of robotics and shortly after began learning German. However, Abigail's true passion was hiking. This was not surprising, as she lived in an ideal location for such activities, North Conway and its surrounding areas, which are known as one of the main spots for hiking and rock climbing in the northeastern United States. The beautiful local landscape continues to draw many tourists who enjoy long walks and outdoor activities. Abigail's high school classmates remember her as a special person who could connect with almost anyone. This ability allowed her to form friendships easily. In 2013, after a busy summer, Abigail returned to school and balanced her daily routine with extracurricular activities, which brought her joy. At that time, she was in a relationship with her boyfriend, Jimmy Campbell, and spent most of her free time with him. Overall, Abigail led a typical life in a beautiful and safe area with a low crime rate, which made her and her loved ones feel secure when they went out or returned home. However, everything changed dramatically when a man named Nathaniel entered her life. Nathaniel Kibbe, known as Nate, lived about 50 kilometers from Conway in Gorham, New Hampshire. He was born on July 15, 1980, and little is known about his family or early life. According to some sources, he attended the same school as Abigail, but many years earlier, meaning they never crossed paths within the school walls or outside of it. During his school years, most of Nathaniel's classmates viewed him as very aggressive and cruel. Reports from peers indicated that he kept a list of names of future victims, primarily fellow students. Additionally, Nathaniel often claimed to be part of a gang called the Vipers, and he was generally regarded as someone not to be trifled with. As Nathaniel grew older, he seemed to change on the surface. He got a job at a company that specialized in mechanical processing and manufacturing. People who knew him during this time saw him as disciplined, and his colleagues and supervisors regarded him as an exemplary employee. However, they were unaware of his dark past. Previously, Nathaniel had attempted to abduct a 16-year-old girl who was trying to get on a school bus. He also had multiple encounters with law enforcement due to banned substance possession. Furthermore, he was involved in various firearm-related incidents and was often caught lying while trying to buy them from specialty shops. This is just a glimpse of his troubling history. Some reports indicate that Nathaniel lived with a 13-year-old girl for several months, claiming she was his girlfriend and openly acknowledging the inappropriate nature of their relationship. In reality, such a relationship between an adult and a minor is a serious crime. Nathaniel's neighbors in the trailer park kept their distance from him. While they didn't see him as an immediate threat, they didn't trust him because of his questionable behavior. On October 9, 2013, Abigail left school and, as usual, went for a walk. Unfortunately, one of her birthday gifts, hiking boots she wanted to wear for her 15th birthday, caused her discomfort. They rubbed against her feet, leading to painful blisters that made walking difficult. Nevertheless, she felt she had no choice but to continue on her way, trying to distract herself from the pain while enjoying the scenery and thoughts about the upcoming holiday. Later, her boyfriend Jimmy texted her again to express his love. Abigail replied with a heart emoji. Abigail's school is not far from home, but her usual walk became long and painful because her feet were chafed. She had to focus on each step, trying to place her feet gently on the ground. So, she felt genuinely frightened when she heard a car approaching. The driver was Nathaniel, who was unusually friendly and welcoming. He offered Abigail a ride, but she politely declined since she didn't know him. However, Nathaniel insisted, noticing that she was clearly uncomfortable. When she explained that her new shoes had caused blisters, he suggested that if she kept walking, her feet would hurt even more, which made Abigail hesitate. He then opened the passenger door of his car, and Abigail reluctantly sat in that position. As Nathaniel started the car, he began asking her various questions. At first, everything seemed fine to Abigail. However, he soon mentioned that he needed to stop at a hardware store to buy a few items for his house. He then drove into the parking lot of a large hardware store and parked in a secluded area away from the entrance. By this point, Abigail was feeling quite nervous, but tried to stay calm and act naturally. She even tried to convince Nathaniel that her house was close enough for her to walk, but when he heard this, Nathaniel insisted even more that he would take her home as they had initially agreed. At that moment, tension filled the air as Abigail decided to unbuckle her seatbelt and try to escape the car. However, Nathaniel quickly reacted to her movement in an unexpected way. He grabbed her shirt with one hand and pulled a weapon from the glove compartment with the other, aiming it directly at her. In a matter of seconds, the situation escalated dramatically, and Abigail realized she was in real danger. Nathaniel not only kept the weapon pointed at her, but also threatened to hurt her. Feeling trapped, Abigail understood that she needed to stay calm and comply with him. After a few minutes, Nathaniel placed a large baseball cap on Abigail's head and bound her hands with tourniquets. He then started the car and drove off. At some point, Nathaniel noticed that Abigail was constantly looking towards the road, positioning her head in such a way that the baseball cap was not limiting. This angered him, and he used a stun weapon on her, causing her to lose consciousness. When Abigail regained her senses, she found herself in a dark, small room without windows. The only thing she could see was a poster on the wall featuring a snake with the words, "Don't step on me." A few minutes later, Nathaniel blindfolded her with tape, tied her hands with plastic straps, and placed a motorcycle helmet on her head. Once he ensured she was completely immobilized and helpless, he removed her clothes and coerced her into intimacy for the first time. From that day on, Nathaniel held the girl captive, indulging in his worst instincts and subjecting her to various forms of abuse. He also threatened to harm her family and friends if she attempted to escape or tell anyone about her situation. Typically, Abigail returned home after dinner, but when 7:00 p.m. arrived and she was still absent, her mother became very concerned. She asked her eldest daughter, Sarah, if Abigail had mentioned any plans to go out. Unfortunately, Sarah had no information to provide. Xenia then tried to call her daughter, but it seemed Abigail's phone was turned off. Given these circumstances, Xenia felt compelled to contact the police to report her daughter missing. Immediately, law enforcement officials used the existing missing child search protocol. Meanwhile, Xenia and Sarah contacted several of Abigail's friends in the hope that one of them might know where she was. However, none of these measures produced the desired results. There was no one who could give them any information that would help them find her, and Nathaniel was the only person who knew where she was. In addition, Nathaniel understood perfectly well that any mobile phone could be tracked, so he almost immediately smashed Abigail's phone. Thus, the local authorities and her relatives were desperately searching for her, checking a variety of hypotheses related to her alleged disappearance. While she was in Nathaniel's power, when Nathaniel spent time with the victim, he tried to turn on the music at full volume so that no one would hear her screams. In fact, the acts of physical aggression from Nathaniel were quite common. Nathaniel used all sorts of tactics to intimidate Abigail in order to keep her under his control. For example, the aggressor constantly told her that if she behaved well, he would not cause her much harm. Along with this, he affirmed that without any hesitation, he would take her life and also her family if the situation required it. So Abigail could only pray. She repeated to herself over and over again that she needed to calm down and try to analyze her situation. She focused on one goal. She needed to do everything possible to save her life. She believed the best strategy might be to get closer to her kidnapper. Enduring bullying from him, Abigail tried to lower his guard. Whenever she could, she spoke to him calmly, insisting that she didn't judge his actions. She also mentioned that everyone makes mistakes and promised to keep quiet about the incident if he set her free. However, all her attempts to get closer to Nathaniel were completely unsuccessful. It seemed that the man was even becoming more cruel than before. The room where Nathaniel kept Abigail was nearly soundproof, resembling a modernized cargo container. There were no windows, making it impossible for her to connect with the outside world. To further isolate her, Nathaniel put up a sign on the front door that read, "Strangers, entry is prohibited." While this seemed odd to his neighbors, they didn't pay much attention, as Nathaniel had always been considered peculiar, and it was his property. During her time with Abigail, he indulged in his disturbing desires, subjecting she to various forms of physical and psychological manipulation. Despite her dire situation, Abigail held on to hope that she would eventually escape this nightmare. She remained determined and focused on a strategy to soften her captor. Gradually, she made some progress. At one point, Nathaniel even allowed her to stay in his trailer, marking a shift in their relationship. Meanwhile, in Conway, posters about Abigail's disappearance were plastered everywhere. Although, despite the local authorities' efforts, they found no specific leads to help locate her. The search for Abigail proved to be extremely challenging. Her disappearance sparked significant public concern, and many people have been closely following the developments of this case. Abigail's relatives were at a loss about what to do next. Although they remained determined to find her, their hope was slowly diminishing. Nathaniel and Abigail also were closely following the news about the case, as it was frequently covered on television, which kept her hope for rescue alive. However, Nathaniel began to feel increasingly uneasy as time passed. Posters with Abigail's image only multiplied in the media, which regularly showed her data, including both a description of her appearance and contact numbers to call in case of any information related to the case. The search for Abigail had become one of the largest in New Hampshire's history. Meanwhile, she continued to endure her worst nightmare. While her search became more intense, the authorities still could not find anything worthwhile to direct their efforts in the right direction. They had already questioned Jimmy, thinking he might have information about her disappearance. However, Jimmy cooperated with the police and confirmed his alibi. A month had passed since Abigail went missing. Her mother was beginning to lose hope. She hadn't checked her mailbox in weeks, but when Xenia sorted through the accumulated letters, she found one from her daughter. Dated October 22, 2013, the letter read approximately, "Dear Mom, I miss you and love you more than you can imagine. I'm sorry about everything that's happened. I've seen the news reports. To answer your questions, I want you to know that I am alive, well, and safe. Even though I miss you dearly, I can't share my location right now. Please stay strong for me, as I am staying strong for you. I've realized that patience, hope, and courage can make a difference. Don't lose hope. Keep moving forward, and remember me. I believe everything will work out for us. I love you. Please give Sarah a hug for me, and tell her I love and miss her very much." Dreams come true. The authorities analyzed this letter, trying to find at least some clue that could lead them to Abigail. Unfortunately, they found nothing useful. They only managed to confirm that this letter was indeed written by Abigail. At least they were completely sure that it was her handwriting. But none of them suspected that this letter was Nathaniel's idea. He thought that it could stop the search or slow down the investigation. In fact, this was not the first letter Abigail had written. She had previously crafted another letter and managed to create a secret message by pressing her nails into the paper. This hidden message contained words asking for help, but they were not easily visible. Nathaniel somehow discovered Abigail's attempt to communicate and punished her severely for it. Then he forced her to write the very letter that Xenia eventually received. For a long time, the letter's contents were kept secret, but many news outlets began to spread rumors that Abigail had willingly run away from home because she might be pregnant. Consequently, almost everyone in the city, including Abigail's classmates, discussed the escape. Abigail's best friend later expressed her outrage at this theory. She believed with certainty that her friend was not expecting a child and felt that Abigail was not the type to shy away from tough situations. Both Abigail's family and the investigators were convinced that she was in serious danger. 6 weeks after her daughter's disappearance, Xenia spoke to journalists, hoping to inspire her daughter with positivity. She firmly believed that Abigail was alive and thought she might see her on television. "I know that hope is stronger than fear. I hope one day you can reach out to me. I feel your presence in my life every day, and I wish for your safe return home as soon as possible." Unfortunately, days turned into weeks, and weeks into a month, with law enforcement still no closer to solving the case. However, they did gather enough evidence to conclude that Abigail was being held against her will. Meanwhile, the relationship between Abigail and Nathaniel was growing stronger. Although it took some time, Abigail managed to earn Nathaniel's trust. He even involved her in one of his illegal activities, working on counterfeit banknotes. Despite this, Abigail was still subjected to physical abuse and insults. Months passed, and the investigation yielded no significant leads. Xenia and Sarah continued to feel sadness and despair. At Nathaniel's house, life continued normally. Despite spending a long time captive, Abigail never discovered the true identity of her captor. She called him by a simple word, the owner. Nathaniel often surprised her with his unpredictable behavior and emotional shifts. Recently, their interactions had included more calm moments, leading Abigail to believe that he might not be as cruel as he once appeared. However, this perception changed dramatically when Nathaniel placed a makeshift collar around Abigail's neck and activated it, sending a strong electric shock through her weakened body. When she regained consciousness, Nathaniel warned her that he would take action if she attempted to escape. By mid-January 2014, Abigail had been held captive for over 6 months. Perhaps her relationship with Nathaniel remained the same as before. Undoubtedly, there was a certain connection between them. However, she was still at a disadvantage, and Nathaniel tried to keep his cool. At this time, some progress was made. For instance, Nathaniel allowed Abigail to read and even gave her several books, which may have been his first mistake. One of the cookbooks at Nathaniel's house had his name on it, and Abigail noticed this. When she addressed him by name, Nathaniel was genuinely surprised and asked how she knew it. Abigail truthfully replied that she saw his name on the book's cover. Being honest was part of her strategy to build a connection with her kidnapper. She hoped that one day Nathaniel would decide to let her go, or someone would simply find her. Abigail has been locked in a soundproof box for very long, and now she is closer to freedom than ever. So interesting. Her potential rescue was not due to her actions, but rather because Nathaniel had been involved in a minor traffic accident. Realizing that it was only a matter of time before the authorities showed up at his door, he decided to call the nearest police station and offered to cooperate. As a result, law enforcement arrived at his home and discovered a large stash of firearms of various calibers. In this situation, Nathaniel willingly surrendered the weapons to the authorities. He allowed the police to search his trailer multiple times. Again and again, police officers went in and out, passing only a few meters from the container in which Abigail was located, but because of his cooperative behavior, she remained captive. Despite Abigail being missing for a long time, her family and the authorities continued to search for her, hoping she was still alive. Nathaniel seemed unfazed by the situation. He would leave his house during the day and return in the evening, without worrying that Abigail might attempt to escape. However, some of Nathaniel's actions changed the situation. He met a woman, and they eventually became intimate. During their conversation, she revealed that she was struggling financially and couldn't afford her rent. Nathaniel decided to help her by giving her some money. Later, while shopping at a supermarket, and it should be said that she was genuinely surprised when the cashier told her that her $50 were counterfeit. She had to abandon her items at the checkout and leave the store quickly. After returning home, she called Nathaniel and took out her frustration on him. She also advised him to dispose of all the counterfeit money he had at home, since the police were expected to visit him soon. Of course, she had no idea her call would have significant consequences for Abigail. When their conversation ended, Nathaniel went into a panic and decided he needed to eliminate anything that could lead to his arrest. Most of all, more than the potential charges of counterfeiting, he was primarily anxious about possible accusations related to Abigail's kidnapping and regular crimes against her personal safety. So, on July 20, 2014, fearing he would be caught, Nathaniel returned almost all of Abigail's belongings. He then placed her in the passenger seat of his car and put the same baseball cap on her that she had worn on the day of her kidnapping. After that, Nathaniel started the car, and they drove together for several hours. Eventually, he stopped and ordered Abigail to get out. He threatened her one last time that he would come back for her, cause pain and suffering to her loved ones if she told anyone about what happened to her or reported him to the police. This is how Abigail found freedom. Later, Abigail reflected that she couldn't tell if what she was experiencing was a dream or reality. However, once she regained her senses, she began walking towards a house. Along the road, she for a long time couldn't believe that she was free. After enduring 9 months of confinement and trauma, she was finally able to return home. As walking to her house, she heard the familiar voice of her mother, who was talking to someone on the phone. When Abigail stepped inside and shouted, "Mom," Xenia was overwhelmed with disbelief at hearing her daughter's voice again after so many months. She even asked for confirmation, trying to ensure it was really her. Later that evening, Xenia urged Abigail to share everything that had happened to her. Threats from Nathaniel quite quickly surfaced in her memory. She constantly avoided details about the identity of her kidnapper. After discussing the situation, Xenia and Abigail decided to contact the police. However, during the police interview, Abigail once again withheld information about her kidnapper, fearing he might return and harm her family. After the police questioned Abigail, the news of her release from captivity gradually spread throughout the area. When Abigail returned home from the police station, she took a bath and then lay down in her own bed. It still felt like a dream, but the horrifying memories brought her back to reality. In that moment, she felt exhausted, and for the first time in a long while, Abigail was able to truly relax, feeling safe. The next day was equally strange for her. On one hand, she wanted to return to her normal life and engage in her favorite activities. On the other hand, she was still plagued by fear and anxiety at the thought of Nathaniel possibly reappearing in her life. The following days passed in a similar manner, and Abigail sensed that her sense of freedom was not yet complete. Perhaps that is why on July 27, 2014, she could not stand it and confessed to her mother that she had deliberately hidden all the information about the man who had kidnapped her. She suggested that they should speak to the police again, which they did. The officers welcomed Abigail's new statement, which proved crucial for the investigation. After Abigail shared everything she knew about Nathaniel, the authorities began preparing an operation to capture him quickly. The following day, the police arrived at Nathaniel's home, surrounded his trailer, and ordered him to surrender. Surprisingly, Nathaniel did not resist arrest. After his arrest, Nathaniel was taken to the police station for questioning. Meanwhile, a thorough search was conducted at his residence, and the police officers did not leave any corner unattended, collecting all the evidence that was of even the slightest relate to the investigation. During the interrogation, Nathaniel requested a lawyer and denied any involvement in the charges against him. The preliminary hearing on this case took place the very next day after the arrest, and in the days that followed, Nathaniel appeared in court multiple times to review the evidence presented by the prosecution. By this point, there was no doubt that he was responsible for the horrific events in Abigail's life. On August 12, 2014, Nathaniel's lawyers filed a motion for his release in court, and unexpectedly, the judge in Kona approved it. However, Nathaniel was prohibited from contacting the victim, Abigail, or her family. He had to stay at least 100 meters away from them. The main trial began in mid-December 2014, with Abigail and her family sitting in the front row at the prosecutor's table, closely observing the defense's arguments. At that time, Nathaniel was being held at the Carroll County Correctional Facility and faced over 180 charges related to Abigail's case. The next court hearing occurred on May 26, 2016, nearly 2 years after Nathaniel's arrest. By then, he had accepted a plea deal and was prepared to admit his guilt, which aimed to avoid a lengthy trial and provided him with some legal advantages. A particularly emotional moment in the trial came when Abigail delivered her final statement. She shared that she had resumed her studies, social life, and sports activities. Then she turned her gaze to Nathaniel and told him that even though he was a real monster to her, but he would always be a man who simply made the wrong choice. It seemed that Abigail wanted Nathaniel to understand that she forgave him. Continuing her speech, Abigail expressed her deep regret that things had not turned out differently, but she acknowledged that her family's safety was paramount. After all, it wasn't she who sent Nathaniel to prison. Abigail believed that he had put himself in such a position when he decided to keep her captive. All this was his own decision. She concluded her speech by thanking Nathaniel, who had helped her through this ordeal, explaining that the experience had made her appreciate her life and freedom much more. Then she turned to Nathaniel and her mother. Xenia told Nathaniel that despite the fact that part of her soul sincerely hated him, she also wanted to thank him for not harming her daughter's life. After Abigail's words, Nathaniel Kibbe pleaded guilty to 7 felony charges, including kidnapping and abuse. He will serve 45 to 90 years in prison. Meanwhile, Abigail was able to return to a normal life sometime after Nathaniel's trial. A few years later, she moved to a new county, started a family, and had a child. In an interview, she shared that during the 9 months she was held captive, she was determined to survive. She also mentioned that forgiveness played a crucial role in helping her return to a normal life, and she considered it the best form of revenge against her kidnapper. The case of Nancy Kissel. Robert Kissel was born on April 21, 1963 in New York. He and his brother Andrew attended technical college and then went on to college in New York. Those who know him describe he as a resourceful person who studies hard and always tries to achieve his current success. In the 1980s, Robert met Nancy, who would later become his wife. After falling in love, they married, and Nancy adopted Robert's last name. She worked as a manager at a taxi company and occasionally took on part-time jobs at a restaurant and bar. Before this, she had worked at a restaurant on Broadway in Manhattan. Robert started his career with a small position in the finance and banking industry. As he gained experience, his career advanced, and his family grew. Eventually, his family had 3 children, making them a family of 5. With the growing family came increasing expenses, including maintenance, including living expenses, tuition fees, and other needs. During this time, Robert received a job offer from the Asian Special Situations Group, which came with a lucrative salary. However, the offer had 2 conditions. He would need to work longer hours, and the family would have to relocate to Hong Kong for the position. In December 1997, the family packed up their belongings and moved to Hong Kong. Life there was drastically different from what they were used to back home, and all 5 family members had to adjust to a new lifestyle. Fortunately, some of the changes were positive. Hong Kong featured superior food quality and a modern transportation system on par with the United States. Initially, the family had to make a lot of effort to stabilize their life, but over time, things started to fall into place. They eventually moved into the largest private housing complex in Thailand. Robert advanced in his career and became vice president of the Asian Special Situations Group. By 2000, he was managing the asset division, earning an impressive $3 million annually. As his career took off, his wife Nancy also found success. She became actively involved in the parent committee at the local school. The two were considered a high-profile, high-powered couple. Although they appear perfect on the outside, they are still facing problems in their marriage. The happy image they presented to the public was a facade that hid the real problems behind. Since the family moved to Hong Kong, Robert began drinking heavily and sometimes to excess. He was also said to have used illegal drugs. Although these allegations have never been verified, Nancy later insisted that they were true. Despite facing these problems, their family still sticks together. Throughout their time in Hong Kong, their friends never suspected that anything was wrong. Financially, the Kissel family was very well off. They owned a luxury apartment in a prestigious area of Hong Kong with a park view, as well as a beautiful country house in the U.S. Since Robert held an important position at his company and couldn't leave his job, it was decided that Nancy would take the children to the U.S. Nancy moved to their spacious country house, which was not fully equipped for long-term living. Given their wealth, the family decided to renovate and expand the house. So Nancy began the construction process by ordering the necessary equipment and hiring workers. While the home was being renovated, Nancy noticed a man working at her house. His name was Michael. an electrician living in the Vermont area. He had been married twice and was financially unstable, a far cry from her husband Robert, who was earning over $3 million a year. However, for Nancy, money was not the main reason she was attracted to Michael. Perhaps Michael's peaceful lifestyle gave Nancy what she was missing. Robert, however, began to suspect that something was amiss. As an intelligent and observant person, he noticed changes in Nancy's behavior, but the distance between them made it difficult for him to confirm his doubts. As the months passed, Nancy and Michael grew closer. He eventually hired a private detective to keep an eye on Nancy, and after a few weeks, his suspicions were confirmed. She and Michael were spending a significant amount of time together. In the summer of 2003, Robert pleaded with Nancy and the children to return to Hong Kong, hoping to salvage their marriage. However, she continued her secret relationship with Michael. Despite being in Hong Kong, she maintained their relationship over the phone. When the family returned to the U.S. temporarily for Robert's medical procedure, she even met Michael at a hotel, while her husband, Robert, was in surgery. As time passed, the relationship between Nancy and Robert continued to decline. They put on a happy face in public, but their arguments were intense and frequent. He becomes increasingly disappointed in her, who is now happy with Michael. Their marriage became unstable, and it was clear that things would come to a head soon. On November 2, 2003, the Kissel family was at home, in their Hong Kong apartment. It was a weekend, so the kids were home from school and had a friend over. As the evening approached, the friend's father, Nick, stopped by to pick her up. Nancy made strawberry milkshakes for everyone, and they all enjoyed them together before Nick left. At that moment, Nick had no idea it was the last time he would see Robert alive. Robert, a hard-working employee, had a critical online work call scheduled for the weekend. Despite weeks of preparation, he failed to join the call, leaving his colleagues worried. The next day, he didn't show up to work. The management quickly learned about his absence. The vice president, David, called Robert's home and his wife, Nancy, answered. She said he was having some personal problems. However, David found this explanation unconvincing. As the week progressed, concerns about Robert's disappearance grew, and David decided to report the incident to the authorities. Soon after the report, authorities visited the Kissel residence, where they met Nancy and her 3 children. As anticipated, Robert was absent. The officers began to feel concerned about the situation. Although there were no suspicious signs at first, they still felt something was wrong when looking at the way Nancy acted and talked about Robert. She said she filed a missing person report for Robert that morning and accused him of assaulting her. However, they did not completely believe her story because there were several things that did not make sense. So they decided to a more thorough search of the property. By midnight on November 6, investigators found an important clue. A staff member at the complex said that Nancy had asked for help moving an old carpet into the apartment garage. The carpet was so heavy that it took 4 staff members to move it. These people complained that the carpet had a strong fishy smell. When checking the garage in the storage room, investigators quickly discovered the carpet. Behind the door was a rolled-up oriental carpet, secured with ropes and wrapped in tape. On top of the carpet, there was a pillow and a bag containing simple items. This situation made everyone feel very strange. A few minutes later, as the carpet was unrolled, investigators uncovered the body of a man. His head was covered with a plastic bag, and his entire body had been wrapped in another plastic bag and tied with tape. The body was identified as Robert. Investigators quickly determined that he had been dead for a long time, as the strong smell of decomposition suggested that this was not a recent death. On the night of November 7 at 2:41 a.m., just 2 hours after Robert's body was discovered, police arrested Nancy and charged her with the murder of her husband. Forensic investigators determined that Robert had been attacked 5 times with a blunt object. In his stomach, they found 6 prescription drugs, including a powerful sleeping pill. Notably, 5 of the 6 drugs had been prescribed to Nancy, making her involvement in the crime all the more clear. One bizarre incident occurred after Nick brought his daughter home from the Kissel residence, where they had all consumed Nancy's strawberry milkshake. Nick's wife noticed that he appeared unusually flushed, exhausted, and quickly fell into a deep sleep on the sofa. Worried that he might be unwell, she tried to wake him, but despite shouting and slapping his cheeks, he remained unresponsive. When Nick finally woke up, he was extremely hungry, ate his dinner, and devoured 3 servings of ice cream. Shortly after, he lost control of his bowels and was unable to reach the toilet in time, staining the sofa. He then fell asleep again and didn't wake up until the next day, with almost no memory of the previous evening. He described his condition as similar to experiencing amnesia. Investigators later discovered that before his death, Robert had hired a private investigator to follow Nancy. This included installing spyware on her computer, which exposed her search history. Among her searches were terms like sleeping pills overdose and drugs that cause heart attack. Nancy admitted to these searches but offered an explanation. She claimed she had been researching these drugs for personal reasons. She explained that the stress of work and frequent arguments with Robert had driven her to despair, intending to harm herself. However, she said she didn't want her children to suspect anything and planned to make her death appear as a heart attack. Based on information gleaned from internet searches, Nancy consulted several doctors in Hong Kong and received 5 prescriptions. The list of medications surprised investigators as it included strong sleeping pills, tranquilizers, painkillers, and antidepressants. Nancy's trial began in June 2005. She stated that her marriage to Robert started to decline in 1997 when they moved to Hong Kong. According to her, he began abusing alcohol and drugs during this time, becoming increasingly violent. She said his behavior left her distressed and often depressed. The main question is what happened the night Robert went missing. The prosecution argued that she had been stockpiling various medications for months leading up to Robert's death. On October 2, 2003, she allegedly mixed the drugs into his cocktails. However, it's unclear why she also added the drugs to Nick's drink. What is certain is that she drugged both men. Nick was lucky. He recovered and survived. Robert, on the other hand, lost consciousness on his bed. Nancy then hit him in the head 5 times with a blunt object. Tragically, he died from these injuries, and his body remained on the bed throughout the night. The next morning, she visited a carpet dealer and purchased a large oriental rug. After bringing it home, she used the rug to wrap Robert's body and stored it in a closet for 3 days. Later, she sought assistance in moving the rug to the garage. Nancy, however, tells a very different story. She claims that in the 2 weeks before Robert was murdered, they had been arguing violently about divorce, and that the argument flared up again on the night of the murder. Nancy said that while she was making strawberry milkshakes for her children, Robert approached her and revealed that he had filed for divorce and intended to take the children to live with him. According to her version, he was holding a baseball bat, which made her feel endangered. She picked up a heavy statue for protection and followed him down the hallway. A confrontation began, during which she spat in his face. She alleged that he struck her, and as they wrestled on the floor, he grabbed her ankles. In what she described as self-defense, she swung the statue at him, hitting him. He responded by striking her with the bat. She admitted to striking him several more times, which unintentionally resulted in his death. Nancy stated that she lost her memory due to the shock of the incident and could only vaguely recall her actions afterward. However, her story made many people suspicious. She claimed that she and Robert fought using a bat and a statue, but experts found no dents or scratches on the bat. Additionally, no traces of DNA from either she or her husband, Robert, were found on it, casting doubt on her story. Furthermore, CCTV footage from the following day showed she buying a carpet, and in the video, she showed no signs of injury. Despite these inconsistencies, Nancy maintained her innocence and refused to provide further justification. On September 1st, 2005, the court delivered its verdict. Nancy was found guilty of murdering her husband, Robert. According to Hong Kong law, the mandatory sentence for murder is life imprisonment. During her sentencing, Nancy, dressed entirely in black, displayed no emotion. Her case will be reviewed every 2 years, allowing the governing authorities to decide whether to reduce her sentence. Nancy is serving her sentence in a women's prison, a stark contrast to the luxurious Parkview apartment she once lived in. Nancy's lover, Michael, a builder, had called her both shortly before and after the crime, yet prosecutors never considered him a suspect. Although she tried to keep in touch with him, he eventually broke up with her. He later got married and informed she about it, even sending her a wedding photo of him and his wife smiling. After Robert's death, his children were sent to the United States to live with Nancy's father. However, due to his old age, he struggled to care for them. Eventually, Robert's brother, Andrew, took custody of the children. Tragically, in April 2006, Andrew was found stabbed to death in the basement of his mansion in Greenwich. This devastating incident added further trauma to the lives of Robert and Nancy's children. At the time of Robert's death, his fortune was valued at approximately $18 million. His 3 children inherited the entire estate, securing their financial future. However, this wealth came at an immense cost. The loss of both their parents. Nancy lost all her appeals and remains in prison to this day, likely to spend the rest of her life behind bars. Michael is alive and well, living far away from Nancy, the woman who took the life of her husband and the father of her 3 children. Nancy had fallen out of love with Robert, and the pressures of her life, along with her unhappiness in the marriage, have driven her to seek comfort in her lover, Michael. However, none of this justifies the extreme actions she ultimately chose. It is said that Robert offered Nancy half of his assets in the dispute, but she refused and wanted the whole thing, and did not need he in her life. Her selfish and cruel decisions have now left her in prison, separated from Robert, her children, his fortune, and her lover. The case of Norma Rodriguez. Norma Rodriguez was born on November 16, 1960, in the small town of Mercedes, Texas, which has a population of about 15,000. The town is located near the southern border of the United States. Norma grew up in a family of 6 siblings, and they had a close bond. Norma was quiet and reserved, often staying out of trouble. When Norma was about 12 years old, her family moved to California, settling in the suburbs of Oxnard. The family hoped that this move would bring them better opportunities. The bustling life in California was a stark contrast to the quiet rural life they had known in Texas. Norma especially loved the beaches and sunsets. After graduating from high school in 1980, Norma chose to attend college in Oxnard, near her family. There she met Tony Rodriguez, a sophomore who became her first love. They dated for nearly 2 years before marrying on March 6, 1981, both at the age of 21. Later that year, she gave birth to her first child, a son named Andrew. In 1989, they welcomed another son, Austin. However, in 1991, Norma's marriage began to suffer. The couple argued more frequently, and Tony spent more time away from home on business trips. His constant absences left Norma with all the responsibilities of the family, children, and work. She often confided to her childhood friend Teresa that although Tony had no problem with alcohol, he often lost control during their arguments, sometimes becoming aggressive towards her and their eldest son. Norma did not want to be a single mother, but she realized that living with an aggressive man was becoming unsafe. After another incident, she and her two sons moved to an apartment just a 10-minute drive from Tony's home. Norma did not file for divorce, choosing to maintain a relationship with her husband to avoid hurting the children. Her apartment was in Port Hueneme. Norma was particularly fond of the local park, where she enjoyed walking with her children every evening. Neighbors described her as friendly, but somewhat reserved, often keeping her distance from others to focus on her sons. After the separation, Norma worked very hard to provide for her children. Although exhausted, she found comfort in her children. In March 1993, Norma began dating a mechanic named Daniel, who was also a coach in the junior league that her 11-year-old son Andrew was a member of. They met at a party. The couple enjoyed spending time together, often going for walks in the local park, sometimes with her sons. Friends and family considered the relationship to be the happiness Norma had long longed for. It seemed that she had finally found joy again after a difficult breakup with her husband. Although things seemed to be going well for the couple, Daniel announced that they were splitting up. The news was a painful shock to Norma, who had not anticipated such an event. Daniel explains that he wants to reconnect with his ex-girlfriend, whom he has just gotten back together. Norma is deeply hurt. To take her mind off things, she decides to have a barbecue at her house on Saturday, May 29, 1993. She invites guests, including her sisters and her friend Beatrice, to help her relax and enjoy the weekend. On Sunday, May 30, she spends the day with her 4-year-old son Austin. They mostly watch TV together while Andrew is in Oxnard with his father. Andrew is scheduled to return home the next day. In the evening, Norma receives a call from Beatrice, who suggests going to the beach the next day. Since Norma has no other plans, she thinks it would be a good way to forget about the difficult breakup with Daniel. The next morning, the police receive a distressed call from Tony Rodriguez. He reports that he has found his ex-wife Norma dead in her home. The police immediately went to Norma's house. When the police arrived at the house, they found Tony, his cousin Hector, and Norma's two sons waiting in the private entrance. In the living room, Norma was found lying on the floor. There were no visible injuries on her body. However, her head was wrapped tightly with tape. The police noticed that her clothes were unbuttoned. Her body was later sent for an autopsy. The police believe that Norma may have known the killer, as her face was completely covered with opaque tape. This may have been to prevent her from seeing the face of her attacker. At the crime scene, there were no signs of a struggle or forced entry. Forensic experts did not find any blood. The only item on the floor near the body was a set of house keys. Valuables were still in the house. The police devoted all their efforts to the investigation. Experts from neighboring cities were summoned, and forensic experts thoroughly examined the crime scene. But they did not find any useful evidence. Norma's sister, Auralia, tried to contact Norma in the morning and could not reach her, so she decided to go check on Norma. Auralia was shocked to see yellow tape surrounding Norma's house. Auralia later reported to the police that Norma had a troubled relationship with Tony and that she had no other enemies. The police quickly focused on this information, knowing that Tony was the one who called the police to report the case. Tony was then invited to the police station for questioning. Tony acted like a grieving husband, and although they had broken up long before these events, he seemed to still have feelings for her. He said that on June 1, he went to Norma's apartment at around 7:30 a.m., as they had previously arranged. He was supposed to take the children to school, maintaining the parenting routine they had established after their separation. Tony was accompanied by his brother Hector. who waited outside in the pickup while Tony went to pick up the children. He knocked on the door but got no answer. Tony found the house unusually quiet and no one answered his calls. He grew increasingly worried, fearing that something was wrong, but he did not have his own key to the house. He used his bank card to wedge it between the door and the wall, successfully unlocking it. Once inside, he called Norma but got no answer. In the living room, he discovered her body, noticing that her head was bandaged and her shorts were unbuttoned. Panicking, Tony ran outside to call his brother Hector. When they returned home, the noise woke Austin, who went out to the living room and found his mother unconscious. Austin was then quickly taken back to his room. Hector, upon seeing the situation, touched Norma's body and felt that it was still warm. He quickly took scissors from the truck and tried to cut the tape covering Norma's nose and mouth, hoping that she could breathe. After removing the tape, Hector realized that Norma was not breathing and had no pulse. In fact, Norma had been dead for some time, and Hector could not feel the warmth, but he assumed that this was due to shock and natural reactions. Tony and Hector accidentally destroyed a lot of evidence and contaminated the shoe prints and DNA samples. The police suspected that Tony had a motive for the murder, as he had just separated from Norma and was very unhappy about her new relationship. In addition, there may have been a conflict over child custody and child support because the children were living with their mother. Norma's sisters reported that she was unhappy with Tony's frequent visits and constant attempts to control her. He claimed that his actions stemmed from his desire to see and communicate with his children. However, according to Norma's relatives, he repeatedly asked to meet and hoped to mend the relationship, which only frustrated Norma and led to arguments. Hector and Tony were asked to take a lie detector test, which they agreed to and completed without any problems. Initially, the police believed that these men were involved in the incident, but after the polygraph results came back, they had to release them. The investigation then shifted its focus to other people close to Norma. After the autopsy, the medical examiner determined that there was no evidence of abuse. Although Norma's clothes were unbuttoned, this may have been an attempt to mislead the police. Norma's head was wrapped in duct tape 14 times. Police collected material from under Norma's fingernails and from duct tape, as they believed that the killer's fingerprints might be on these items. Unfortunately, the technology available in the 1990s did not allow for comprehensive DNA analysis. Although all the evidence collected was preserved, it could not provide any useful information at the time. The police decided to interview the children. Andrew, the eldest son, said that when his father brought him home on the evening of the 31st, he was also unable to contact his mother. However, he noticed that the window was open enough for him to enter the house. It was late, and he was surprised to see his younger brother Austin still awake. When Andrew asked why Austin wasn't sleeping, Austin replied that his mother wasn't feeling well and had a bandage on her head, so he was waiting for her to feel better. Andrew thought his mother had simply gone to sleep, as she usually rested in the living room. Andrew put his younger brother to bed and lay down to avoid disturbing his mother. Initially, the police thought that talking to a 4-year-old might not yield useful information. However, the boy surprisingly shared many details. He spoke to the police while a child psychologist was present. According to Austin, that evening, his mother opened the door to a man who introduced himself as Corey. The man had dark skin and an argument broke out between them. Austin witnessed the stranger attack his mother and wrap duct tape around her head. 10 days later, Austin shared new details. This time, he claimed that a light-skinned man named Warren had entered through the kitchen door and was responsible for wrapping duct tape around Norma's head. This left the police baffled, as there was no evidence that more than one person was involved in Norma's attack. Ultimately, it was believed that the interaction between family members after the murder could have distorted the child's memory. The police quickly discovered that the suspects were Corey and Warren. Norma's relatives knew this as well. Norma had worked with them for a long time and had a friendly relationship with them. However, Corey Davis was not present at the party that Norma hosted. He lived about a 20-minute walk away. It was known that he had feelings for her and asked her out on several occasions, but she refused. After being rejected, he persisted and would show up at Norma's house uninvited. Norma had no romantic feelings for Corey, but was reluctant to reject him outright to avoid hurting him. Most witnesses described Corey as calm and kind, although some found him a little strange. Warren confirmed that he had attended a party hosted by Norma. He said that they chatted until everyone else left, and he watched TV for a while, before going home around 10:30 p.m. The next day, he met up with friends in Santa Barbara. Warren denied any involvement in the murder and described his relationship with Norma as purely platonic, insisting that he had no romantic feelings for her. His friends later backed up his claim. Corey Davis, who worked with Norma, also denied any romantic relationship with her, explaining that they only interacted at work. He was at home with his parents on the night of the murder. The police noticed that Corey acted nervous during the interrogation and was reluctant to cooperate. Despite this behavior, there was nothing particularly alarming that caught the attention of the police. The police then proceeded to interview people close to Norma. Her friend Beatrice mentioned that at the barbecue before her death, Norma had expressed concern about losing her house keys. Interestingly, those keys were found next to her body when the police arrived. This discovery seemed important. The police decided to question Corey again, so they went to the address he had provided. They discovered that he had given them a false address and that he lived elsewhere. The police then decided to conduct lie detector tests on Corey and Warren. To the police's surprise, both passed the tests without any problems. The case seemed to have reached a dead end. However, there is still one more suspect on the list, Norma's ex-boyfriend, Daniel. He insists that there was nothing wrong with their relationship, saying that he and Norma broke up a long time ago and remained friends. He is now in a new relationship and has no conflicts with Norma. He denies any wrongdoing and his alibi has been verified. Daniel successfully passed a lie detector test, leaving the investigation with no suspects. The police decide to review the case and talk to Norma's friend Beatrice again. This friend reveals that she had a close relationship with Norma. Beatrice had told Norma about her affair, which was going on behind her husband's back. Norma had let Beatrice use her house so she could meet her lover, even giving her a key for easy access. This led the police to suspect that Beatrice's husband might be seeking revenge, or that it might be Beatrice's lover. Now the police had two new suspects to investigate. First, they spoke to Beatrice's husband, but he had a confirmed alibi. The police then met with Beatrice's lover, but he was also quickly eliminated as a suspect. The situation became more serious when the police found the body of a second victim, 26 days after Norma's murder. The new victim was Beatrice Felice, an 87-year-old deaf-mute woman who was not a friend of Norma's. She was found stabbed to death in her bed at a nursing home a few blocks from Norma's apartment. A month later, on August 5, 40-year-old Cynthia Berger was found dead in a burning house. After firefighters arrived, they discovered Cynthia's body in the bathroom. Cynthia had been strangled and eventually died from smoke inhalation. The situation has shaken the police station in a small town that has never had a crime scene before. Now, 3 murders in quick succession suggest that a serial killer may be involved. The police are overwhelmed and need to stop the killer immediately. Meanwhile, public pressure mounts as locals hold memorials to honor the victims and raise awareness of the tragedies. Since the town was unprepared for such a large volume of crime, an FBI agent is brought in who specializes in psychological profiling of criminals. In 1995, the police received information about a man suspected of killing at least 5 women in the United States. The man was identified as Glenn Edward Rogers, 30 years old, whose previous crimes were similar to those that occurred in the local area. Glenn was convicted of first-degree murder of 2 women, one in Florida in 1997 and another in California in June 1999. After Glenn was arrested, he claimed he was in California at the time of the crime. The Port Hugh violence stopped after the 3rd victim died. The situation changed dramatically in 2000 with the advent of new forensic technology. By 2002, the DNA collected was analyzed, but the police database showed no matches. However, in 2003, after further analysis, a forensic scientist found a match. The DNA under Norma's fingernails belonged to Warren Mackey, 39, a former co-worker of Norma's. Although he was able to pass a polygraph test, something often done by hardened criminals without emotion, Warren lied about his plans on the evening of the murder and even convinced friends to support his false alibi. Police were amazed by Warren's ability to deceive people. On August 27, 2003, Warren Mackey was arrested during questioning. He was given one last chance to confess, but he continued to deny his involvement and soon asked for a lawyer, refusing to cooperate further with the investigation. Warren was charged with murder. A preliminary hearing took place on March 2, 2004. The Supreme Court questioned whether the case should be classified as first or second-degree murder. The situation was resolved on January 10, 2005, when Warren agreed to a plea deal with the prosecution and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. In his confession, he said he had been under the influence of alcohol and drugs that night, which affected his memory of the events. Warren Mackey, then 40, was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. As part of the agreement, he was not allowed to file any appeals. Soon after serving the required minimum time, he began asking for parole, but all of his requests were denied, largely due to the active involvement of Norma's family. 2 other murders that occurred around the same time were determined to be unrelated to Warren. The case of Elizabeth Wetlaufer. Elizabeth was born on June 10, 1967, in a small village near Woodstock, Canada. Her parents, Douglas and Hazel Parker, were Baptists. Her father served as an elder in the local church and her mother was very submissive to her husband, completely following his lead. They controlled every aspect of her life, from choosing friends, joining clubs, to personal interests. Her parents expected her to be a good and obedient girl. In elementary school, Elizabeth, nicknamed Betty, was a shy and awkward child who often became the target of teasing from her classmates. She had no friends during this time. However, things began to change in the early 1980s when she started attending Gorin Park Secondary School in Woodstock. There, she became the goalie for the school's field hockey team and participated in several other school sports teams. However, she still displayed some rebellious behavior. On one occasion, she pulled the fire alarm at school. When asked why she did it, she explained that she wanted to get a boy she disliked into trouble. During her teenage years, Elizabeth realized she was bisexual and had feelings for other girls. However, knowing that her parents would not accept it, she tried to hide and suppress her feelings. This led to her starting to hate herself and gradually her surroundings. By the age of 15, she was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. On the surface, she seems like a normal young woman, but she often gets angry. She was impulsive and lacked the ability to empathize with others. Psychiatrists attributed her condition to the strict control imposed by her parents. At 19, shortly after finishing school, Elizabeth wrote a poem titled "Concert," which reflects her state of mind. The poem portrays human life as a musical concert, starting with a baby's cry and ending in deathly silence. In this somber piece, she boldly asserts that everyone's life is the same, inevitable, repetitive, and ultimately meaningless. After finishing school, Elizabeth decided she wanted to pursue a career in journalism. She enrolled in college and studied journalism for a year, following her dream. However, her parents, especially her father, persuaded her to change her path. At her father Douglas's insistence, she enrolled at Baptist Bible College to study medicine. Douglas even attended training courses with his daughter and closely supervised her studies. During this time, Elizabeth confided in friends that she felt depressed, insecure, and full of self-doubt. She admitted she hated herself and couldn't understand why she was studying something she had no interest in. However, she eventually graduated from Baptist College with a degree in counseling. After graduating, she began working for local social services, assisting people with disabilities. After a while, she decided to pursue medical school to become a certified specialist. By 1995, she had received her nursing license. In 1997, 30 years old, Elizabeth married Donnie Wetlaufer, whom she had met at a Baptist church. He worked as a truck driver, and after their wedding, she moved into his home in the center of Woodstock. However, she did not have feelings for her husband. For her, the marriage was primarily a way to escape the control of her parents. At the time, she was already working as a nurse at a hospital. Around this period, Elizabeth was suffering from borderline personality disorder. She sought treatment for her condition, but no one knew that she had been secretly using opioids at work. These drugs, prescribed to her patients for severe pain, were stolen by she for her own use. Her theft came to light when she nearly died from an overdose while at work. Although she was saved, the incident led to her being fired from the hospital and banned from practicing medicine for several years. As a result, in the early 20s, she lost her job and fell into poverty. Then, Elizabeth worked part-time at a nursing home. At the same time, she began looking for love on dating websites. Even though she was still married to Donnie, a truck driver, she met another woman on the internet, and the two began dating. Donnie, whose husband was often away for work, discovered his wife's affair and kicked her out of the house. In 2005, Elizabeth rented a 2-bedroom apartment in the suburb of Woodstock, near her parents' home. She invited the woman she had met online to move in with her. 2 years later, she was still living with her partner in the rented apartment. They struggled financially and needed a stable income to make ends meet. In 2007, she regained her nursing license and found a full-time job at the largest nursing home in the area, paying about $45,000 a year. The job was demanding and required a high level of responsibility. She primarily worked night shifts, caring for 2 elderly patients with diabetes. Her main duties included monitoring their blood sugar levels and administering the correct dose of insulin when necessary. The nursing home where Elizabeth worked housed elderly residents for extended periods. Unfortunately, there was no proper oversight of their safety or the insulin supplies. Just weeks after starting her new job, she began experimenting on her patients to determine what dose of insulin would be fatal. She secretly injected insulin into a discrete location on their body. High doses caused hypoglycemic shock in the elderly, leading to a severe drop in blood sugar levels. This resulted in symptoms such as vomiting, painful convulsions, and the gradual failure of vital organs. Death could occur within hours or take several days. Elizabeth's first victim was Clotilde Adriano, 87, who suffered from both diabetes and dementia. Clotilde survived thanks to the timely intervention of other nurses. 9 years later, Elizabeth confessed that she hadn't intended for Clotilde to die. She explained that she was angry at the time and felt that Clotilde might be someone God wanted to take away. She also said that God wanted her to do it. She later did the same with Clotilde's sister, Albina de Medeiros, who was also saved. During this time, none of the nursing home staff noticed anything unusual or suspicious. 3 months went by. By August 2007, Elizabeth was caring for a new patient, James Silcox, 84, a World War II veteran. He had recently suffered a stroke, leaving him almost completely immobilized, and he also had diabetes. He was often agitated, unaware of where he was, and screaming, calling out the name of his wife, Agnes. During these episodes, Elizabeth was so angry that she wished James dead. One evening after dinner, Elizabeth walked to the medical supply room, retrieved an insulin pen, and went to James's room. She injected him with 50 units of rapid-acting insulin, twice the amount she had previously used on her other victims, Clotilde and Albina. Tragically, no one intervened to help James, and he died. Later, while in prison, Elizabeth confessed that just before losing consciousness, James had told her that he was so sorry and that he loved her. It remains unclear who James was addressing, but she admitted that in that moment, she felt a sense of shame. At the same time, however, she felt a strange relief, as though a heavy burden had been lifted. After James's death, doctors attributed it to natural causes. No one suspected anything, and no autopsy was performed. Elizabeth's colleagues saw her as a caring and professional nurse. She was friendly, polite, and seemed genuinely interested in her work. Any odd behavior she exhibited, likely due to her alcohol addiction, was largely ignored. She has repeatedly gone to work drunk. Once, after a night shift, her colleagues found her unconscious in the basement. However, she was not fired. Patients spoke highly of her, and management turned a blind eye to her minor problems. By early 2008, Elizabeth ended her relationship with her boyfriend and met Shell Andrews online. Shell worked in a prison canteen and lived in the provincial city of Prince Albert. Excited about her new love interest, she bought a plane ticket and visited Shell for a week. She wore a bright summer dress and red lipstick for their first meeting. During their first meeting, she did not leave Shell's side for a minute, constantly hugging, praising Shell, and exuding a happy glow. They rented a motel near the airport and spent the night together. However, the next morning, she woke up in a terrible mood. In the following days, Shell noticed that Elizabeth's behavior was quite strange, changing erratically like a child. She often got angry for no reason. At that time, Shell's mother was seriously ill and was being treated at the clinic. Shell was puzzled when Elizabeth, who was a nurse, did not help or even bother to ask about her mother's condition. By the end of the week, Shell decided to end the relationship, telling Elizabeth that they couldn't build a healthy future together. She flew home in distress and later wrote a somber poem about her fear of the truth being revealed. By late 2011, 3 more residents at the nursing home where Elizabeth worked had died under suspicious circumstances. 87 years old Gladys Millard, 95 years old Helen Matheson, and 96 years old Mary Zurowinski. The deaths occurred at different times, but doctors did not notice anything unusual, did not contact the police, and no autopsies were conducted. Elizabeth was constantly consumed by fear that her crimes would soon be exposed. She was especially terrified of being caught after the murder of Mary. The next day, she and a friend went on a Caribbean cruise. During the trip, her friend noticed she was taking an unknown drug. She confided in her friend that she was deeply troubled by the recent death of a patient. She said that she was depressed, but did not reveal further details. Alongside her internal struggles, she was also battling a renewed addiction to pills. She had become dependent on hydromorphone, a drug she initially used to manage her condition. However, she lost control and became severely addicted. Access to the drugs was easy for Elizabeth, She would steal hydromorphone tablets from her patients, replacing them with other medications like laxatives. Elderly patients were easy to deceive. She also took medications from deceased patients, leaving their bottles empty. No one questioned her actions or noticed anything unusual. Later, she admitted that the drugs helped her relax at work. She felt calmer and claimed that she no longer wanted to harm her patients. Between 2011 and 2013, she refrained from causing harm to any elderly individuals. 2 years later, Elizabeth continued to attack a new victim, Helen Young, an elderly woman who suffered from dementia and needed constant help. She described Young as very troublesome. On July 13, 2013, before dinner, she injected Young with a massive dose of insulin. That night, Young suffered terribly without receiving any help. By morning, she passed away. After the incident, Elizabeth comforted Young's granddaughter with words of encouragement and hugged her. In that moment, she heard laughter from deep within and felt a surge of energy and strength within her. In 2014, Elizabeth killed 80 years old Maureen Grant and 79 years old Maureen Pickering. She also attempted to murder 63 years old Michael Priddle and 57 years old Wayne Hedges. By mid-2014, she was fired from the nursing home, where she had worked for 7 years. The reason for her dismissal was that she had made repeated errors at work, including prescribing the wrong medication to patients. However, these errors did not involve insulin or opioids. Once management became aware of her frequent errors, they asked her to resign. Elizabeth found herself without money and struggled to secure a new job. During this time, she lived alone and received no financial support. It is known that she worked for a few months at a senior care center in Ontario. She then moved on to several other jobs at medical facilities, but never stayed in any one place for more than 3 to 4 months. Occasionally, she experienced despair. Feeling guilty and seeking relief, she attended church in the UK, where she confessed terrible sins to her pastor and his wife. The pastor said that he would pray for her, but also warned that if she continued to take another life, he would be forced to report it to the police. Later, however, the pastor told authorities that he didn't believe Elizabeth's confessions and thought she might be mentally unstable. In the summer of 2016, Elizabeth wrote an email to her ex-lover Shell, confessing that while working, she had violated the rules of sterility, potentially causing pain to patients. She also admitted to having recurring dreams about killing people. Shell, however, did not take the email seriously and chose not to respond. Between 2015 and 2016, it was revealed that 70 years old Arpad Horvath died due to Elizabeth's actions. She also harmed 2 other elderly women, 77 years old Sandra Towler and 68 years old Beverly Bertram. At one point, she was offered a job at a clinic specializing in treating schoolchildren with diabetes. Despite her experience, she declined the position, recognizing the risk of repeating her harmful behavior and not wanting to hurt children. On September 16, 2016, Elizabeth was admitted to the Toronto Addiction and Mental Health Center. During her first 20 days there, she confessed to staff multiple times that she had intentionally harmed her patients. However, no one believed her. One psychiatrist advised her to write down her confession, warning her that anything she wrote would be handed over to the police. She complied, writing a 4-page letter in which she listed the names of 8 patients who had died under her care and others she had harmed. In her confession, she not only detailed her crimes, but also expressed anger toward her victims, her life, and her work. She revealed an hatred for nearly everything around her and described her daily battle with overwhelming anger, which she attempted to suppress with medication. After reading Elizabeth's confession, the staff at the center were terrified. Many doubted the truth of her claims, but they decided to hand her notes over to the police for investigation. It was discovered that during her addiction treatment, she had sent an email to an old friend. In the email, she admitted that she was responsible for the death of a patient. Her friend Glenn replied, suggesting it might have been a mistake and that the patient could have died of natural causes. He tried to support her, believing she might be imagining things. However, when she confessed that she had caused multiple deaths over a long period, Glenn contacted the police. By then, the authorities had already received her written confession. Despite this, they allowed her to return home. She moved in with her parents, who refused to believe their daughter could be guilty of such crimes. Detectives began gathering evidence against Elizabeth. They reviewed medical records from the facilities where she had worked and compared the data. The horrifying truth was confirmed. On October 24, 2016, 40 years old, Elizabeth was charged with 8 murders and 6 attempted murders. She was placed in a prison cell. Psychological evaluations revealed that she exhibited symptoms of borderline personality disorder, including mood instability, impulsiveness, anger outbursts, and a fear of abandonment. News of her arrest sparked outrage in the media. The crimes she committed have made the public lose trust in nursing homes. Authorities admitted that without her confession, no one would have suspected that elderly patients would be murdered by their caregivers. During her trial, Elizabeth recounted her crimes in detail. She showed no remorse and even expressed relief that her heinous actions had finally been exposed. She believed that doing these things would help her release her emotions. Despite her confession, her parents refused to accept her guilt. They adamantly denied that their well-behaved daughter, Elizabeth, could be a criminal. Elizabeth's father insisted in court that his daughter had always been upright and honest. Even if this were true, she could have kept quiet and taken her secret to the grave. However, she ultimately chose to be honest. The family denied claims that their daughter had romantic relationships with women. Both parents described she as kind-hearted and helpful to those in need. Regarding the divorce, according to them, it was Elizabeth's husband, Donnie, who decided to divorce her due to her mental health. They emphasized that Donnie did not leave because she was having affairs with women. As for the rumors of substance abuse, they explained that her job was very stressful, which left her constantly tired and anxious. They denied that she was addicted and insisted that she had just made a mistake while taking the medication and accidentally overdosed. On June 27, 2017, Elizabeth Wettlaufer was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. In her final statement, she said that she had caused terrible pain. She expressed hope that the families of the victims could find peace and healing. The nursing homes where Elizabeth worked were temporarily suspended due to patient harm, but have since reopened. The facilities now have stricter controls on staff and medication management. Elizabeth is currently serving her sentence at a women's correctional facility in Kitchener, Ontario, Canada. She is 56 years old and is not expected to be released until 2041. She is known to suffer from diabetes and requires regular medication. The case of Marta Russo. The Marta Russo case not only shocked Italy in the late 1990s, but also became a symbol of unsolved mysteries in the history of criminal justice. The sudden death of a promising young woman on the campus of Sapienza University, which is considered a symbol of intellectualism and enlightenment, left the whole society in a state of shock. Behind that tragic event, the doubts, controversies, and the inscrutable motives of those accused created a story that was heartbreaking and mysterious. Today's story will show how carelessness can lead to dire consequences when an investigation begins. Typically, the circumstances tend to complicate the investigation. Unfortunately, some detectives manipulate these circumstances to fit their narrative. This can result in a controversial case like the one we will discuss today, which still many unanswered questions. Marta Russo, born in 1975, described as intelligent, energetic, and promising. At the time of the events, Marta had just turned 22 in March. She was a young and beautiful law student at the prestigious University of La Sapienza in Rome. Fulfilling her long-held dream of attending this historic institution, Marta had ambitious plans for her future and aspired to become a lawyer. Before achieving that goal, she needed to complete her degree. She was known for being compassionate and sociable, always eager to help others. She even expressed her wish to donate her organs in the event of her death. On the morning of May 9th, 1997, she was having a typical day, walking on the university campus with her friend Rosanna Capone, moving between the buildings of the University of Statistics, Politics, and Law. They were carrying textbooks and notebooks while discussing their upcoming exams. There were no signs of anything unusual happening. Suddenly, at 11:42, Rosanna heard a strange clicking sound, and Marta collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Rosanna thought it might have been a weapon, but she wasn't certain. Several witnesses who saw Marta fall rushed over to help. However, other passers-by disagreed with Rosanna's belief that Marta had been attacked by force. They listened to Rosanna but thought she was mistaken, as the possibility of a violent attack at such a time and place seemed too improbable. All doubts were quickly resolved when a pool of blood began to form beneath the head of Marta. Who would attack a defenseless student in the middle of the day on a university campus filled with people? It seemed unbelievable. Marta had been wounded, and a small bullet hole was discovered in her left ear, indicating that the bullet had entered her brain. Bystanders called for an ambulance right away, which arrived to assess her condition. Marta was alive but in critical condition and needed to be rushed to the hospital. Once at the clinic, she fell into a coma. Her brain function ceased, but life support was maintained in hopes that she might recover. Her parents prayed for her safety and hoped she would regain consciousness. Meanwhile, doctors recognized that her chances of recovery were nearly non-existent. Even if Marta did wake up, there was almost a certainty that she would be confined to a wheelchair for the rest of her life. At the time, forensic experts were working at the crime scene. It was an open area connecting two university buildings. Along the edges of the passage, there was a building facade with windows and a blank wall opposite, with a few sparse trees. Detectives needed to determine the attacker's location at the time of the incident. Marta's friend couldn't pinpoint where the sound came from. It was very quiet, and Rosanna was the only witness to hear the sound of the attack. Another challenge arose when Marta's body was moved several times during attempts to help her. This made it difficult for detectives to establish her exact position when she was attacked, to find the location of the criminal. In order to understand who could even have the idea to shoot an ordinary student, the police began investigating Marta's background. Investigators believed that she may have been in contact with a villain or even involved in a crime, but the investigation showed that the victim was an ordinary, kind girl, and studying her biography did not turn up any potential suspects. Her friends were also typical students, and she had not been in a relationship recently, she spending all her free time studying. Even her diary entries were examined, but they contained nothing suspicious. The investigators began to suspect that the killer's true target was Rosanna. Marta just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, so was killed by accident. The police had gathered some remarkable information. In the days leading up to the murder, Rosanna received 45 anonymous phone calls, which were quite unusual. When she answered one call, there was only silence on the other end, and she gained no information. Additionally, an unknown man called Rosanna's father late at night caused a heated debate where he insulted her but never revealed his identity. With this information, the police started to believe that the attacker intended to kill Rosanna, but mistakenly killed Marta instead. They considered the possibility that the attack was a failed act of revenge against Rosanna's father. He is an influential official who oversaw several prisons. The investigators was thought that the murder of his daughter could be the work of a former inmate. However, detectives investigated these theories and ultimately found them unconvincing. While Rosanna's father may have had enemies, there was no evidence to suggest a motive for harming his family members. Another hypothesis is put forward. The university, in addition to its fame, always had a bad reputation. There have been multiple uprisings and spontaneous attacks on campus. Such cases do happen with alarming frequency. This university was even the site of a terrorist attack on February 12, 1980. Unknown assailants riot in the lobby by weapon in one of the academic buildings while a professor was present. He was attacked 7 times and died as a result. This attack was not an isolated incident. It occurred during a time of heightened political tension, with similar outbreaks linked to the so-called Red Brigades. On March 27, 1985, a university economics professor became a victim of unknown criminals in a new attack. The Red Brigades claimed responsibility for these crimes, stating that such actions were part of their political struggle. However, the murder of Marta and even Rosanna in 1997 appeared to be senseless acts of violence in this context. Another supporting detail for this theory is the coincidence that May 9th marked the anniversary of the discovery of the body of Aldo Moro, a prominent political figure. It is believed that on this occasion, the Red Brigades decided to launch a new artillery attack. In previous incidents, the Red Brigades had openly admitted their guilt for the crimes they committed. Yet this time, no one took responsibility for the attack on Marta Russo. This was illogical, as it would have made more political sense to target a university professor rather than an ordinary student. As the police investigated, doctors were tried to save Marta. A surgeon removed a .22 caliber bullet from her head, which was then sent to the lab for analysis. At this point, ballistics experts believed that the faint noise heard was likely due to either the use of a silencer or the types of weapons that produce a quieter sound, especially at a distance, making it hard to identify. The .22 caliber was a common choice, as it has low stopping power and generates significantly less noise than more weapon firearms. Forensic experts worked on reconstructing the bullet's trajectory to help identify potential shooting locations. However, because the body had been moved, their efforts were ultimately insufficient and likely inaccurate. The investigation indicated that the attacker likely operated from a building across the street from where the victim was walking. It was presumed that the guy has attacked from a window. Calculations suggested that the guy was in a bathroom adjacent to the classrooms where statistics students were studying. Given the low number of students present at that time, this location allowed the attacker to remain unnoticed and escape without drawing attention. The day after the attack, this theory was supported by a statement from a statistics student who reported visiting the bathroom shortly after the incident. He noticed that the window was wide open, even though it was usually kept closed. Detectives focused their efforts on the area, including the street beneath the window. They quickly located the shell casing from the weapon, which had been overlooked on the first day because it was hidden under a car. To the surprise of ballistic experts, the casing did not match the bullet that killed Marta. Investigators found numerous bullet holes on the wall next to the crime scene. It appears that the students used the restroom as a weapons practice range. Someone had been practicing frequently. A cartridge case discovered at the scene might have come from these practice sessions. While investigating the bathroom, police also uncovered a small nearby room used as a storage area by a cleaning company that worked at the university. Given the trajectory of the bullet, detectives considered this room as a possible location from which the criminal attacked. Access to this room was initially restricted. Investigators conducted thorough checks on all cleaning company employees associated with the university. They discovered that many of these employees were weapon enthusiasts with licenses. Some of them could obtain weapons even without a license. Furthermore, the inventory storage room contained a significant amount of ammunition. Investigators found various types of weapons and equipment, including silencers. They also discovered several different types of bullets, including .22 caliber cartridges. It is curious that the employees of the cleaning company were free from cleaning from 9 to 14 o'clock, and there should not have been anyone there. The attack on Marta occurred at 11:42 a.m., which fell within this time frame. Investigators needed to interview all the cleaners, but they offer alibis in an effort to clear themselves of suspicion. Eventually, all the employees' information was verified. During the investigation, no illegal firearm storage was discovered, as the owners had proper licenses were registered. The cleaning staff admitted that they occasionally used the wall of a nearby building as a weapons practice range, but they insist on always practicing from a trailer and being cautious when no one is around. This situation raised more questions. On May 14, the equipment keeping Marta alive was turned off, and she was pronounced dead. She had been in a coma for 5 days without recovering. Her parents and sister honored her last wish by donating her organs. Around 10,000 people attended Marta's funeral, including relatives, friends, students, and local residents who wanted to pay their respects to her. The mother of Marta revealed that she felt a strong sense of anxiety on the morning of the tragedy, which she found impossible to shake off. Initially, she didn't think much of her unease until the police contacted her about Marta's problem. There was growing public dissatisfaction with the police due to a series of high-profile cases that had not been solved. These failures severely harmed the reputation of the police in Rome. Therefore, it was urgently necessary to restore the lost reputation. This provoked decisive actions from the police, which had a devastating effect. The investigation began when detectives approached the librarian, a 36-year-old man who owns a suppressor and a .22 caliber weapon. Initially, he was considered a suspect, but he had a solid alibi. He was in the audience during the attack, and many witnesses confirmed his presence. As a result, he was cleared of suspicion. The detectives enlisted top forensic experts to search for microscopic gunpowder particles in the building. They meticulously examined windowsills, floors, and various surfaces to identify the location from which of the attacker. Unfortunately, significant time had elapsed since the incident, and the room had been cleaned multiple times. Additionally, rain the following day may have washed away any evidence on the building's exterior. Investigators scoured several floors, and after about 3 hours, they discovered 2 tiny particles of barium and antimony, which are linked to weapon. However, not on the windowsills in the restroom, but on the floor above, in office number 6, rather than on the restroom windowsills. In office number 6, a stain on the windowsill was suspected to be gunpowder, but it was uncertain because many employees in the building owned weapon. Therefore, it was challenging to determine who might have left the trace. Despite the doubt, the stain was deemed reliable evidence. The substance's chemical composition was analyzed, revealing similarities to printer ink or burnt rubber. Investigators concentrated on office number 6, which was a likely location for the attack. Based on the possible trajectory calculations, the attack could have originated from almost anywhere on the campus facade, including the roof. Nevertheless, the police identified the individuals who were in that room during the time of the attack. The office was designated for department assistants, and both students and faculty could access it. All individuals present were questioned. During the investigation, detectives noticed a peculiar pattern. Each person claimed they were not in room number 6 at the time of the murder. The investigators suspected this was a sign of collusion among them. While searching office number 6, they discovered a mobile phone that had made a call at 11 44, on the day of the case, just minutes after the attack. The investigators traced the call to a professor's daughter named Maria Chiara Lipari. She admitted to being in the room during the call, but claimed she did not see anyone with a weapon. She firmly denied any involvement in the murder, stating she did not know Marta, had no motive, and did not possess a weapon of the specified caliber. At this point, the police officers were determined to investigate the situation involving Office Number 6 thoroughly. They decided to interview Maria at the police station. During these interviews, Maria appeared confused and changed her story multiple times. She was questioned 13 times, and she provided new details in almost every session. Afterward, she expressed that the investigators were pressuring her. Eventually, she recalled that when she returned to Office Number 6 to make a phone call, a man had come out to meet her. He mumbled something unclear, like hello, but Maria did not recognize him and only watched as he walked away. However, her account changed once again. Maria had a confirmed alibi, which ultimately protected her from being accused. She attributed her behavior to fear and severe stress, and ultimately, she was crossed off the list of suspects. Unfortunately, Maria's troubles were just beginning. One of the suspects was a man named Salvatore Ferraro, who out to be an assistant in philosophy and law. Maria identified him, and he quickly began cooperating with the police. She felt compelled to do this under the threat of being charged. According to her, he resembled the young man who had exited Office Number 6 when she entered, but she remained uncertain until the very end. The story underwent frequent changes, likely due to the ongoing pressure on Maria. The first interrogation lasted 14 hours, after which investigators repeatedly approached her, increasing the pressure. It is unclear if Maria can be considered a reliable source, but the detectives were determined to find the killer at any cost. To verify her statements, they conducted numerous interrogations with other individuals connected to Office Number 6. These witnesses provided inconsistent testimonies that did not align with one another. In light of this, the investigators worked hard to piece the information together. At one point, Bruno Romano, the university director, intervened. She expressed her dissatisfaction with the police's handling of the case and pointed out several violations she had observed. Her main concern was that the investigation was not allowing lawyers to be present during witness interviews. Because of her complaints, the director herself became a suspect, now under investigation for allegedly covering up for the killer to protect the university from problems. Under public pressure, the police sought to find a suspect, but all the individuals they considered had solid alibis. The focus then shifted to Gabriella Aledo, the secretary of the university head. Maria reported that Gabriella had been in Office Number 6 before the attack. The police began to put serious pressure on Gabriella, even threatening her. In parallel, they established wiretapping of the phone in the office where she worked, and there were even plans to install a hidden camera. During her conversations with investigators, Gabriella faced explicit threats. They warned her that if she didn't identify the murderer, she would be accused of the crime herself. On the 45th anniversary of the incident, Gabriella, wanting to protect her career and personal life, stated that she was far from Office Number 6 and had no knowledge of who might be responsible for the murder. She emphasized that an illness she had endured for years prevented her use of weapons. The detectives were so eager to resolve the case that they even brought in doctors to verify her medical condition. They interrogated Gabriella relentlessly, including her son-in-law, who worked in law enforcement, to pressure her into confessing. Despite being a relative, he played a role in forcing her to confess. The other detectives departed, leaving Gabriella alone with her son-in-law. Despite the circumstances, he was unable to extract a confession from her. The only thing she admitted was that she had been in Office Number 6. The absence of lawyers added to the complications of the situation, driving Gabriella into despair. Besides, on June 11, authorities decided to arrest director Bruno Romano, charging him with aiding and abetting the murderer, as it was suspected he was covering up for the crime. Later, when criminal cases were brought against all participants in the investigation for abuse of office, the prosecutor insisted that this was a trick to scare those involved. Gabriella, feeling the weight of the intimidation, especially following the arrest of the director, lost her composure out of fear. Eventually, she revealed that on the day of the murder, she saw two men in office number 6. One of them drew a weapon when Marta Russo and her friend were positioned between the window and the opposite wall. He attacked, causing Marta to fall. Gabriella also recalled that the young men appeared panicked and clearly did not expect to kill anyone, as they ran away in fear. Witnesses identified the gunman as Salvatore Ferraro. The second man was recognized as Giovanni Scattoni, a 29-year-old philosophy assistant. After receiving the confessions, the detectives were able to piece together all the information. Initially, the young men did not appear to be the type to commit a cold-blooded murder. Even unintentionally, the investigators were not troubled by the fact that Salvatore and Giovanni were not acquainted with Marta and had no motive. They repeatedly denied their guilt, but the Gabriella's confession making it difficult to deny. A major issue for Salvatore arose from the searches conducted in his apartment, where forensic books about the ideal crime were discovered. Investigators quickly assumed that this suggested he had plans for a perfect murder. Although Salvatore argued that he needed this material for his university research, the investigators pointed out that forensic science is not typically a focus for philosophers. However, there was a significant problem. The detectives have been unable to find the weapon that killed Marta. During the trial, both Salvatore and Giovanni maintained their calm demeanor and continued to assert their innocence. There was no direct evidence linking them to the crime, yet the prosecution labeled them as ruthless murderers. Although the prosecution presented evidence from Gabriella, but the jury was out on this. They focused on the traces of gunpowder found on the windowsill of office number 6 and the bullet's trajectory, overlooking the fact that this information was largely inaccurate and speculative. Witnesses who had endured long periods of torture testified. The trial photos clearly showed that Gabriella and Maria struggled to conceal their fear. This situation echoed the experience of a security guard who had seen the defendants in office number 6. He had been a suspect in the case, but chose to cooperate with the police and was later cleared of any suspicion. During the trial, Gabriella recounted how the defendants fled the university after the attack, but this did not prove their involvement in the case. The defense lawyers for the students pointed out that the particles found on the windowsill were not from weapon, but rather from car exhaust. This suggested that the attack could have originated from a different window, potentially implicating other individuals. The lawyer argued that the witness testimonies were exaggerated. Experts, based on their reconstruction of the events, believed that Marta's death resulted from a tragic accident during a reckless game. The attack occurred accidentally due to a series of ricochets hitting her head, which would classify it as manslaughter. By the end of the trial in 2001, both defendants were found guilty. Giovanni received a reduced sentence of 5 years for manslaughter and unlawful possession of firearms, initially sentenced to 7 years. Salvatore involved in the torture of women, but had all charges dropped by university officials. After their convictions, they appealed their sentences, prompting a review. The Supreme Court upheld Giovanni's manslaughter sentence, but dismissed the illegal possession charge. Consequently, Giovanni's prison time was shortened to 5 years, and he was ordered to pay 300,000 euros in legal fees. This case raises many questions, as there is still uncertainty about the guilt of Giovanni and Salvatore, making it a highly controversial situation. However, Some supporters feel that justice has been served. The victims of the police officers' actions spoke out, expressing their dissatisfaction, leading to significant public outcry in internal investigations. Their accounts were corroborated by strong evidence, which included several interrogation recordings that contained threats. These victims have expressed their concerns to investigators. Gabriella reported feeling intimidated and unsafe, and she highlighted the lack of legal representation during interrogations. This action was risky, as it was believed that the police might have support. So, their appeal led to a new investigation. Unfortunately, it quickly ended with no police officers facing any consequences. Gabriella and Maria have long been free and are continuing their lives. Gabriella, now over 50, is a philosophy teacher in Rome who has had to decline several opportunities and faces criticism. He is married and lives a normal life. Salvatore Ferraro works as a lawyer. He writes books, appears in shows, and helps those who have suffered from injustice and cruelty. The most troubling aspect is that if there was indeed a miscarriage of justice, Marta's killer is still at large. To help alleviate some of the pain caused by this situation, an exception was made for Marta's family. Marta's mother was permitted to embrace the woman who has survived for 20 years thanks to Marta's heart. She is grateful for this gift, recognizing that through this generous act, a part of Marta lives on in others. The case of Brian Cohey. A normal morning in a quiet town is suddenly shattered by the horrific discovery of the dismembered body of an unknown victim hidden in a family room. What led to this inhuman act? Where is the line between mental instability and intentional crime? These questions have turned the case into a long-lasting nightmare in the public mind. Brian Cohey was born on January 10, 2002, in Grand Junction, Colorado, USA. He was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder and attention deficit disorder at a young age. In high school, Brian began to show antisocial behavior, becoming an outsider who often clashed with other students, causing them discomfort. He enjoyed humiliating other children and spent a lot of time online, where he bullied his chat partners. This behavior occurred both on social media and at school. It worsened over the years. In the 11th grade, Brian's parents were called to school again because the principal reported that students and teachers felt unsafe around him. Brian frequently teased, insulted his classmates, leading to fights. However, his parents believed these concerns were exaggerated. In 2018, Brian got into legal trouble for the first time when he was arrested for assault after using a homemade weapon to attack another student, causing serious injuries. As a result, he was suspended from school. In 2019, Brian faced similar issues again when he triggered a panic attack in another student with post-traumatic stress disorder. Brian deliberately targeted this student without regard for the consequences. That same year, he was suspended once more for making inappropriate comments toward female students. Throughout this time, Brian displayed an obsession with cruelty and violence, particularly towards serial killers. Brian openly idolized the notorious serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer, and even shared his terrifying passion with his friends. Other students nicknamed him Demir, and Brian was pleased with it. In high school, a teacher discovered a diary in Brian's briefcase that contained detailed statistics about various serial killers. Brian was fascinated by the number of victims, their motives, and the methods they used. He had a penchant for dark humor and often shared gruesome jokes. The teachers called his parents about his behavior. As a result, Brian was transferred to a school for children with special needs. His parents thought his behavior stemmed from an aggressive nature. They had previously taken him to a doctor to explore ways to address his troubling behavior. Medical staff at the center quickly recognized that Brian needed a thorough evaluation to check for potential psychosis. However, he refused to be hospitalized or undergo further testing. He was taking medication for attention deficit disorder and anxiety, but it did little to help him, particularly during this challenging time. Despite his behavior issues, Brian managed to maintain a small group of friends. After high school, they all became outcasts. After graduating from high school, Brian got a job at a local grocery store. Around the same time, his parents divorced. He lived with his mother, while his father visited him nearly every day. Despite the divorce, his parents remained on good terms. The mother operated a kindergarten, and the father started a small business making life jackets. Although the parents had enough money to support their son, it did not help improve Brian's situation. Early in the morning on February 28, 2021, police received a strange call from a boat station near the Colorado River, where the father of Brian worked. Brian had gotten his car stuck in the mud on the riverbank, and the vehicle was subsequently pulled into the water. It fell from a steep bank and sank a few meters deep. By the time the police arrived, Brian was already there with his parents, whom he had called for help. There were some caring people on the pier who helped Brian warm up. The police sought to understand how and why Brian ended up in this situation at night. He claimed he was looking for privacy and a peaceful place to be himself. However, the police found his story hard to believe. They questioned how he could have deliberately driven the car backwards towards the water, and then, when he tried to leave, causing the vehicle to roll into the river. Although Brian managed to escape from the sinking car, he was completely drenched and at risk of hypothermia. As it turned out, he had arrived there late in the evening and stayed until dawn. It was odd that a young man his age was only engaged in such activities. His parents told the police that he had developmental disabilities, which made his behavior different from others. Brian wanted to call for help because it was February and cold. He was soaked and didn't know how to get home. Unfortunately, his mobile phone had died. After getting out of the car, Brian went to the road, hoping to get help from passing drivers, but no cars were in sight. After 5 minutes, a man and his son stopped to offer assistance. They gave him a mobile phone, allowing Brian to call the police and his parents to keep warm. The man invited Brian to sit in their car and provided him with support. Brian was clearly distressed about the situation, fearing his parents would be upset when they found out he had sunk the car. The unusual incident made the police chuckle. They didn't pay much attention to the submerged car. Meanwhile, Brian's parents were on the pier, trying to figure out how to retrieve the vehicle from the water. Brian's father owned a business nearby and was familiar with the area. He realized that he would need specialized equipment to solve the problem because the shore was very steep. Unfortunately, it was too early to call a tow truck, and Brian was cold and at risk of hypothermia. They called several tow truck companies until they finally found a free vehicle. All this was written off as a funny absurdity. The police facilitated the family so that the parents could change clothes and let their son warm up. The officers then went back to the boat dock to help tow the car. However, their laughter quickly turned to concern when the car was on dry land, as they noticed something that looked like blood dripping from it. One officer promptly contacted the boy's father to alert them that Brian might be hurt. He could be unaware of his injury because of hypothermia. The vehicles were returned to the family without any inspection or collection of blood samples by the detectives. They not confirm whether the liquid they found was blood or something else. It simply resembled blood in color. Fortunately, Brian was unharmed, and the incident was dismissed as an accident. However, the following day, on March 1, police began to realize their oversight. A woman named Monique called 911 to report that a man named Warren Barnes was missing. Monique owned a wedding shop near the place where Warren frequently rested. They had formed a friendship because he loved to read and often sat in the same spot nearby. Warren was homeless, but was known for being pleasant and calm. Monique often spoke with him and would give him small jobs to help him earn money for food and water. Warren was well known in the city. especially for his passion for reading. People regarded him as friendly, intelligent, and well-read. Although Warren never shared the details of why he was homeless, those around him understood that he had faced significant challenges in life. On March 1, Monique stated that she last saw Warren on February 27 around 5:00 a.m. He would often come to the store before it opened, chat with her, drink coffee, and receive his tasks for the day. They had planned to meet the next day, but he never arrived. Concerned, Monique reported the situation to the police on February 28 after discovering that Warren's wallet had been found at the boat station, which had her phone number written in it. The police reached out to her to return the wallet, which raised her concerns. Warren had always been responsible and took his job seriously. During their 2 years of working together, he had never been late or missed a day, except for 2 occasions when he had informed her in advance about his absence. She found it odd that the wallet was discovered at the boat station, especially since Warren did not own a car and had no reason to be there. The location was quite far from where he lived, taking about an hour and a half to reach. This made her think that something might have happened to her friend and assistant. She provided detectives with a single photograph of Warren, taken several years before he disappeared. Coincidentally, the wallet was found by Brian's father, whose business was located near the boat station. It was discovered in Brian's car, immediately after the vehicles were towed. When his father asked Brian about the wallet, he said he had found it at the station and intended to return it to its owner, but he had forgotten due to the events of the previous day. However, his parents didn't believe him because they also found latex gloves and a large kitchen knife with suspicious blood-like stains. They were aware of their son's unusual behavior and couldn't understand why he would take someone else's wallet. While Brian was attending a party with his group of friends, the horrifying moment came. Terry, Brian's mother, found a human head hidden in a large plastic bag in Brian's closet. There was another similar bag, but she couldn't bring herself to open it and check what was inside. Instead, she placed both bags in the kitchen sink and immediately called her ex-husband, convinced that their son had killed. His parents contacted Brian and asked him to come home right away. They remained calm and didn't mention what they had found in his room. The father told Brian that he needed to retrieve the keys to the drowned car, and Brian, not suspecting anything, left the party. When he arrived at his home, several police officers had already been called and were on the scene. They quickly found he standing on the street in front of Brian's house. The officers asked him why his parents were worried enough to call the police. Brian calmly explained that they had likely discovered a severed human head and hands in his closet, and he then confessed to the murder. Brian did not resist arrest and was cooperative. He willingly got into the police car and went to the station for questioning without being handcuffed. He appeared cheerful and seemed oddly pleased with the situation. In contrast, Terry was in a state of hysteria. Her ex-husband tried desperately to comfort her, as she struggled to accept that their son was now a murderer. After Brian arrived at the police station, one of the detectives stayed behind to speak with his parents. They recounted the events of the past 24 hours, including the situation with the car and wallet. According to his father, Terry was skeptical of Brian's explanation about the wallet, which prompted her to check his room for anything suspicious. She had a nagging feeling and ultimately made this horrifying discovery. He claimed he discovered a wallet in a car, which contained Warren's ID and Monique's phone number. He quickly reached out to Monique, who was connected to the missing man, hoping to return the wallet. During this conversation, he learned that Warren hadn't shown up for work and that there was a search underway for him, while Brian dismissed any alarming thoughts. His parents spoke with him, but he offered various excuses. Brian remained unusually calm, prompting the police to ask him basic questions to assess his mental and physical state. His demeanor was striking. He appeared unconcerned about his actions. He provided a detailed account of events, sometimes speaking with a sense of pride and making inappropriate jokes. According to him, on the evening of February 27, he was driving and noted that he was in a very troubled state of mind, hearing voices that urged him to find a victim. Around 11 p.m., he stopped under a bridge near the sheriff's office, where he decided to rest. He thought it was a suitable place and proceeded to put on 3 layers of gloves, wear the mask, and took a knife. Brian went outside, removed the tarpaulin, and without warning, began to strike Warren in the head and neck. Warren tried to defend himself and repeatedly asked, "Why are you doing this?" Despite his pleas, Brian continued to hit him. Brian estimated that he inflicted 30 to 40 stab wounds before stopping. Throughout the attack, Brian repeatedly said dirty, smelly, expressing his disgust for the victim. By the end of the assault, Warren showed no signs of life. Brian noted that he was sweating but was surprised at how easy it was to kill someone. When he finished, the victim's head was practically separated from the body. Next, he decided to explore the insides, so he opened the abdominal cavity. Brian then cut off the victim's hands and finally victim's head. He made a long cut from ear to ear, leaving a horrifying mark on the victim's mouth. Brian had difficulty recalling all the atrocities and details of the crime scene, much of which was later deleted from his phone. However, experts managed to recover these images, revealing horrifying details of the senseless murder. Brian placed the head into a separate bag. He then loaded everything into the trunk of his car and drove home. Once there, he stored the remains in the closet, cleaned the knife, and washed his clothes. According to his confession, during the act, he made animal sounds and growled. Many people from his life later confirmed they had noticed similar behavior in him before. Brian stated that he felt no remorse or pity, which was clearly a demonstration of his indifference. In fact, he took pride in emulating his idols. Throughout most of the interrogation, Brian smiled. The investigators were horrified by the details of the crime and the enthusiasm with which Brian recounted them. It was as if he wanted to remember every aspect of the murder, aiming for as a maniac. He even drew a rough map of the bridge and the crime scene from above. Eventually, the investigators realized he was reliving the murder in his mind, which seemed to give him immense satisfaction. During the attack, he accidentally tore one of his gloves, but he only noticed it later. Wanting to avoid capture, he returned to the crime scene and took Warren's body. He then headed to the coast and the boat dock, but after throwing the body into the water, his car got stuck in the wet ground and slid into the river. As a result, he had to seek help. After the crime became public, police conducted a thorough examination of Brian's car and discovered many more bloodstains than they had initially found. However, this evidence was no longer so important since the investigators had in their hands the parts of Warren's body, as well as a confession which was recorded and documented throughout. During his interrogation, Brian not only smiled, but also made cruel jokes about his victim. His parents had often heard his dark humor, but never suspected he was capable of such violence. Terry was aware of her son's fascination with serial killers, but she didn't fully take his obsession seriously. Wanting to guide his intense interest in a positive direction, she gave him a book about forensic science and murder investigations. She hoped this would inspire him to become a successful investigator instead of being consumed by his fascination. Unfortunately, her efforts were in vain. Instead of guiding him away from harm, they ultimately helped him prepare for the murder of a homeless man. After the interrogation, the police spoke with Brian's friend, Keelan, who had spent time with him on the day of his arrest. Keelan had known Brian since 9th grade and described him as a very secretive person who enjoyed making provocative jokes and dark humor. Just before the crime, Brian confided in her that he planned to kill a homeless person, thinking no one would care to look for that person. However, Keelan took this as joke. Brian and his friends shared love for humor, and his friends do not take Brian's violent thoughts seriously. Brian's parents also paid little attention to his behavior at school and believed that teachers were unfairly criticizing him. At that time, concerned for their safety, the teachers held a meeting to discuss Brian's behavior. Brian's parents agreed to monitor him more closely after he expressed admiration for the criminals. When the police discovered Brian's diary, which contained statistics on serial killers, they uncovered his criminal plan. It out to be a plan according to which he was supposed to organize a home invasion to kill adults and children, then take valuables and leave the scene of the massacre. Investigators believed he would use a hunting knife and a .45 caliber weapon to carry out his plan. Fortunately, Brian did not have the opportunity to execute his plan. In his diary, he also expressed his belief in natural evil, which he used to justify his future actions. Although law enforcement officers have recovered Warren's body parts, his remains have not yet been fully recovered. The search in the water has continued, but not with enough urgency. The police had strong evidence, including a confession, to charge Brian with murder. During an interview with detectives, Brian admitted that he had been planning the crime for about 6 months. He had thoroughly researched forensic science, knew that the deaths and disappearances of homeless individuals received little attention from investigators. He even considered leaving a body at the crime scene but changed his mind because influenced by a book his mother had given him. Brian's calculation that homeless people were treated less attentively out to be correct, but chance intervened in the matter, which exposed him. If it hadn't been for a car trouble incident, he might have successfully committed murder. Investigators reviewed his internet activity and found that, in the year before the crime, his online activity increased significantly. He was also dealing with mental health issues and frequently read about paranoid and schizoid personality disorders. On February 28, the day after the murder, he searched for information on how to delete data from an Android phone and how to dispose of organic waste. Although he had never received any formal diagnoses, he believed he had schizophrenia. He reported experiencing delusions and felt that he was being watched by everyone, even birds. Due to these claims, the police were cautious when interacting with him, concerned that he might attempt to evade responsibility by arguing that he was insane. Brian didn't stop at just one detailed account of a murder. He admitted that on Halloween 2018, he killed a cat. He caught a cat, put it in a bag, and then abused, beat, and trampled it for an extended period before killing it. Afterward, he hid Cat's head in his house. When the remains began to decompose and smell, he simply discarded them. Many people were aware of this incident, yet Brian faced no consequences. During his interrogation, he could not be silenced. He kept sharing the bizarre story after another. He claimed that shortly before the murder, his parents discovered a toolbox in his room containing hammers, shovels, knives, ties, a saw, adhesive tape, and ropes. He openly stated that these items were intended for killing people. His parents urged him to get rid of the tools, warning that they would have to contact the police if he didn't. Even then, they still believed he was incapable of committing a crime. According to his diary entries, he initially planned to find an escort girl to lure, torture, and eventually kill. He thought no one would search for such women or homeless people, but he later changed his mind and considered a different approach. Brian denied finding any satisfaction in his criminal acts. When asked about his motivations, he admitted to admiring killers and being intrigued by their ability to take lives. He believed he was no different from them and wanted to try it himself. During the investigation, authorities discovered Brian's writings in which he expressed his philosophies on life. These writings were just as incriminating as his confessions, revealing the cruelty that dominated his thoughts. In one of his final posts, he expressed regret for the murder, but his concern seemed more focused on being caught than on the harm he caused an innocent person. In January 2022, the court ordered Brian to undergo a psychiatric evaluation. He showed no remorse for his actions, but was clearly unhappy about being imprisoned for many years. Along with his lawyer, he pursued an insanity defense. However, psychiatrists deemed him competent to stand trial. The prosecution presented strong evidence, including body parts, other evidence, and Brian's own confessions. Throughout the trial, Brian often smiled. Ultimately, he was convicted of first-degree murder and evidence concealment. Brian Cohey received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 13 years. The judge declared this case to be the most horrific and inhumane of his career. The Brian Cohey case is one of the most shocking cases in the community, highlighted by its brutality and alarming signs of psychological instability. Brian, a 19-year-old youth, murdered a homeless man. He was held responsible for his barbaric act with a life sentence in prison, removed a dangerous threat to society. The case of Beatrice Frustieri. Jean-Pierre Faure and Beatrice Frustieri had serious problems in their marriage, which led them to decide that divorce was the only solution. Beatrice admitted that Faure was the only love of her life, and she always believed that would never change. When they first fell in love, they were a happy couple, spending all their free time together. They later had a daughter named Angelica. Beatrice often said that her husband, Faure, was hot-tempered. However, she was an active, lively, and beautiful person. After about 20 years of living together, they understood each other very well. However, their relatives and friends may notice that their relationship is getting worse. Although they stayed together, the mutual understanding they once had was gone. Beatrice often complained about her husband, blamed him for being temperamental, something she loved when she first met her, now becomes a reason why she feels uncomfortable. However, Beatrice is not a perfect person, and this is often mentioned by Faure's family. She was very active, loved to attend parties, and often dressed to show off her beauty. However, Faure and his family believed that she did this not only for herself or for Faure, but also to attract attention from other men. A man named Jean-Claude Dulieri became a close friend of the family. He claimed to have met Faure during their teenage years, and the two had become close friends, growing up in the same neighborhood. The relationship was so close that Faure even got Dulieri a job in his father's company. Before the tragic incident happened, Dulieri was invited to help build a hill in the Faure and Beatrice backyard. During this time, he had a close relationship with their family, visiting them daily and working together. Their friendship grew deeper, and the trio often celebrated holidays and special occasions together. Near the time of Faure and Beatrice's divorce in 2005, he grew closer to them, visiting often, bringing wine with him each time. Faure's daughter, Angelica, noticed that Dulieri was persistently trying to get her father drunk. His behavior was so excessive that she began to suspect he was doing it on purpose, possibly to spend time alone with Beatrice. Her suspicions were not unfounded. Over time, as tensions in the family increased, the situation became worse. Faure eventually discovered that she had been unfaithful to him, prompting him to seek a divorce. During this time, Dulieri quickly became Beatrice's new lover. However, no one was surprised, because she had officially separated from her husband, Faure. Now all that remained was to complete the administrative procedures for their divorce. At this time, Beatrice sought emotional support and received comfort from Dulieri. Meanwhile, Faure seemed to have given up all hope of reconciling with Beatrice or saving their marriage. He became furious, and tensions within the family continued to rise. Besides, Dulieri grew closer to Beatrice as she worked through the divorce proceedings. This situation lasted until the night of March 16, 2005, when Faure suddenly and mysteriously disappeared. 2 days later, Faure's daughter, Angelica, reported him missing to the gendarmerie. She said her father had no intention of going anywhere, especially as her parents were in the midst of a court battle over property division and child custody. Four rarely left his home, except for work. He was a private person and had no plans to travel far, something Angelica knew very well. Upon receiving the report, detectives began investigating, but he seemed to have disappeared without a trace. A search of the house turned up no clues, making it difficult to determine where to begin the search. The investigators turned their attention to Faur's close circle of acquaintances. Beatrice and Dulieri naturally drew the most scrutiny. During questioning, Beatrice cried frequently, but often gave unclear or rambling answers. Her testimony was often contradictory, but she always insisted that she had nothing to do with her husband Faur's disappearance. Although her behavior aroused the investigators' suspicions, they were unable to extract a confession from her. 2 weeks after Faur went missing, a purchase was made in his name and from his bank account. A car had been purchased and was immediately placed on the wanted list. The vehicle was quickly located using CCTV footage, which revealed it had been driven to Faur's residence right after the purchase. The entire building was searched. The car was later found burned out in the basement of the building where Dulieri worked, which was still unfinished. It appears that someone tried to destroy the evidence, but the burning of the car was not entirely successful. Investigators found critical evidence inside the car, including a bloody towel in the trunk. DNA analysis confirmed the blood belonged to Faur. Similar traces were also found inside the car, particularly on the back seat, indicating Faur had been inside the vehicle and seriously injured. Based on the amount of blood found on the towel and in the car, it was likely that Faur had died from his injuries. He had been locked in the trunk of a car that had been purchased under his own name and with his own money. This discovery led the authorities to launch an official investigation into the possibility that Faur had been kidnapped and murdered. Police also began wiretapping conversations. Beatrice and Dulieri, now not only dating but living together, live in Faur's house. Detectives quickly obtained disturbing audio recordings of their conversations in which they spoke ill of Faur. On April 6, 2005, they were arrested and taken into custody. During a preliminary hearing, Beatrice and Dulieri admitted they had been lovers for a long time, but denied any involvement in the murder. Faur's body has yet to be found, complicating the investigation. During his time in prison, Dulieri wrote letters to the court and investigators, trying to prove his innocence. He claimed to be Beatrice's victim and considered his relationship with her a big mistake. After 10 months in custody, Beatrice was released on bail, but Dulieri remained imprisoned. At that point, the investigation had not yet found any evidence that Beatrice was involved in the murder, and Faur's body had not yet been found. Eventually, she went to the police to reveal what really happened. On November 14, 2007, Beatrice appeared in court. All of her family members were present to support her, especially her daughter, Angelica, who appeared very nervous. In court, she revealed that she knew where her husband, Faur, was buried. This revelation shocked his family. She said that she would be willing to show them where he was buried. So the trial was adjourned, so that an investigation could be opened to verify this vital information. Beatrice stood on the rocky ledge of Cap Canaille, surrounded by police. This place is well known in investigative circles for its bad reputation. Several times during the search, bodies were found at the foot of the cliff. This time, the remains were found wearing blue sweatpants, identical to those worn by Faur. Faur's family confirmed that these were his remains and sent them to the forensic laboratory. Unfortunately, the body was too damaged to determine the exact cause of death or the full extent of the injuries. Most of the details of the incident had to be based on Beatrice's account. Curiously, the police discovered the remains of two different people at the foot of the cliff. There were 2 skulls and several bone fragments scattered nearby. In addition to some pieces of clothing, they also recovered a gold ring, a pair of earrings, and a bracelet. Some of these items were identified as belonging to Fore. While it was initially unclear who the second body belonged to, it was later identified as Dominique Ortiz, a young woman. Her presence at the site was no coincidence. She was the fiancée of Dulieri. She went missing in Marseille in 2001. This raised many doubts about the circumstances of her death and her connection to Fore. Fore's friend Dulieri did not leave a good impression from the start. He was a stern and gruff man. The appearance was compounded by a scar on his face, which he said was from a motorbike accident many years ago. Fore's younger sister filed a police complaint, stating that she suffered daily abuse from her brother. Things got serious when he injured her thigh. During the trial, he denied these allegations, but family and friends described him as a master manipulator. While he appeared pleasant and calm at first, he was in fact controlling, jealous, and aggressive. Of course, when the remains of Dominique and Fore were found to be linked to him, the authorities dismissed the idea that this was just a coincidence. Authorities suspect that Dulieri, a 39-year-old Mason from Marseille, killed his fiancée, Dominique, by pushing her off a cliff. He then attacked his friend, Fore, and had planned to dispose of the body in the same location. Prosecutors argued the motive was rooted in jealousy and a love triangle. This prompted him to attack Fore, whom he considered a rival. His main goal is to eliminate Fore, to ensure that the woman he loves, Beatrice, does not have to share her daughter or her fortune with Fore. Beatrice, 41, accused her lover, Dulieri, of a brutal crime. In her account, the incident occurred on the night of the 16th, when she returned home late after an evening shopping trip. Upon entering her home, she was shocked to discover a gruesome scene in the kitchen. This happened just days before her divorce proceedings were set to begin. She said she entered the house and found Dulieri standing over Fore's body, which was lying face down with a fatal head wound, likely from a blow from behind. Beatrice describes Fore as seriously injured and near death. Her lover, Dulieri, was holding a large kitchen knife, typically used for cutting meat. One of the kitchen windows was shattered, with glass shards stained with blood scattered on the floor. She wanted to call for help, but Dulieri stopped her. When she questioned him about what had happened, his behavior was erratic, and he curtly responded that the fewer questions she asked, the fewer problems they would have. During this time, Fore died from his wounds. Beatrice asked Dulieri to call the police and tell them what had happened. However, he then approached her with a knife in his hand, threatening and looking straight at her. Realizing the danger, she backed away and followed his orders. Then he threw a towel over Fore's head and asked her for help. With no other choice, she was forced to agree to help his dispose of the body. They used a plastic bag to cover Fore's broken head to limit the bleeding. Beatrice explained that the body was dragged to an unfinished building and dumped in the basement, behind stacks of building materials. Terrified and under the threat of death, she felt compelled to comply. Using a newly acquired vehicle, they drove toward Cap Canaille, where they pushed the body off a ledge. She recounted hearing a dull thud as Fore's body struck the rocks below. Then Dulieri approached her, and she thought he was going to push her down too. To her surprise, instead of killing her, he led her to the car. Before letting her in, he violently grabbed her shoulders, shook her angrily, and asked her what she thought about all that had happened. However, Beatrice was too shocked to say anything. She believed that no matter what, she would become Dulieri's next victim. Then he forced her into the car. The entire ride, she was terrified, unsure of where he were going or what would happen to her. To her surprise, they returned to her house. From that moment on, he moved in with her. He kept her under constant surveillance, never allowing her to leave his side. He only allowed her to open the door when he was present and did not allow her to use her cell phone in private. He even followed her into the bathroom to make sure she did not report it to the authorities. She lived in extreme fear and was unable to help clarify the case. Shortly after moving in, Dulieri disposed of Four's belongings. He also forced Beatrice to help clean the house of any traces of blood. They cleaned everything together. Beatrice later stated that she had been under immense pressure the entire time, leaving her unable to resist or report the murder to the police. She gradually realized that he was a real monster. All his terrifying aspects were revealed during this time. When Dulieri learned of her confession, he immediately dismissed her account and called her a liar. Even the lawyer representing Four in the divorce case doubted her testimony. According to lawyer, shortly before his death, Four had described his wife, Beatrice, as a manipulator and a cheater. He claimed he simply wanted to end their toxic relationship as quickly as possible. The prosecutor's office agreed with this account. They argued that Beatrice was at least an accomplice or even an active participant in the massacre. During her initial interrogation, she had the opportunity to tell the police what had happened, but she did not. She was clearly unhappy that he wanted to end their relationship and had a motive for the murder. Beatrice's daughter, Angelica, continued to stand by her mother, while Four's family took a completely different view. The situation had caused family conflict even before the trial began. By the time the hearings started, Angelica and her grandparents were on opposing sides. Both families braced themselves for a confrontation, the outcome of which could determine the freedom of one or both of the criminals, Beatrice and Dulieri. In any case, it took time to verify the new testimony. The hearing resumed on September 15, 2008. By this time, the relationship between the two families had become even more tense and hostile. Angelica's grandparents alleged that Beatrice's lies were the reason Angelica turned against the family. Both Beatrice and Dulieri faced the risk of life imprisonment. The prosecutor's office sought to prove that they were both involved in Four's murder. Many experts from different fields have been invited to attend this high-level trial in order to clarify the truth. Since the remains could not provide enough information, additional experts were needed to collect as much expert data as possible to help the jury reach a fair and objective conclusion. Forensic psychiatrists analyzed Beatrice and Dulieri's psychological profiles, which cast further doubt on Beatrice's story. Compared to Dulieri, she seemed unusually anxious. They repeatedly blamed each other and accused each other of lying. Dulieri even argued that the body found was not Four's. However, this claim was invalidated, as DNA testing confirmed that the remains were indeed Four's. During the hearing, a forensic expert testified, aiming to clarify key questions. Expert identified 3 serious injuries to Four's skull, located on the back of the head and the crown. The force and placement of these injuries aligned with Beatrice's account of incident. According to the expert, the attacker struck Four from behind, delivering multiple powerful blows and killing him. These details seem to fit Dulieri, who was physically weaker than Four. Not having the strength to face him directly, Dulieri took the opportunity to attack from behind. To support the expert's argument, the prosecution presented Four's skull and some of his bones. They showed signs of trauma and even saw cuts on the bones. For the Four family, this presentation was very painful, but it was considered necessary for the case. In addition, the prosecutor's office used another skeleton because they were investigating the possibility that Dulieri was involved in the murder of Dominique, who was found near Four's body. All of the above evidence was carefully arranged and labeled in boxes, then brought to the hearing. After the hearings, it was discovered that Dominique's father had been trying for a long time to retrieve his daughter's body and bury her. However, He was unable to do so because law enforcement agencies had difficulty completing the relevant procedures. At the same time, her remains had been examined by forensic experts for a long time in the laboratory. This was the greatest pain for him, causing him to be angry and curse Dulieri. When both sides presented their arguments, the prosecutor requested a 20-year sentence for Beatrice and a 30-year sentence for Dulieri. While the jury deliberated, the media interviewed Dulieri, who maintained his innocence and expressed a desire for the ordeal to end quickly. He claimed that he had been wrongly imprisoned for 3.5 years and did not want to spend the next years of his life in prison. Despite his hopes, the jury found Dulieri guilty. The court sentenced the defendants to the exact terms requested by the prosecutor, 20 years for Beatrice and 30 years for Dulieri. For's family was largely satisfied with the verdict, but they argued that she deserved a harsher punishment, as they believed she had not only been involved in cleaning up the crime scene, but had played a much more significant role in the massacre. In their view, she also deserved a 30-year sentence. However, Beatrice's parents and daughters strongly opposed this. While in prison, Beatrice filed an appeal and placed high hopes on her lawyer. On the morning before the hearing, her lawyer continued to speak to the media, expressing confidence that they could win the appeal, especially since the case had attracted so much public attention. Finally, Beatrice was in the courtroom with Dulieri. From the outset, her behavior did not work in her favor. She arrived wearing an overly flashy outfit, with bright makeup and a festive hairstyle, as if preparing for a celebration, rather than attending a court hearing about her spouse's death. Typically, defendants often choose simple clothing to avoid being negatively evaluated by the jury. However, she made it seem like this was a happy occasion. The defense focused on emphasizing that the prosecution's allegations lacked direct evidence. Even the forensic team had difficulty identifying Fowry's body, let alone reconstructing the incident leading up to the death. The prosecutor, however, focused on Beatrice's own account of incident. As in previous hearings, Beatrice's daughter, Angelica, was there to support her mother. All her efforts are focused on rescuing her mother from prison. By this point, the prosecution had obtained recordings of phone conversations between Beatrice and Dulieri, made just 3 weeks after For's death. These recordings were played in court. The recording contradicts Beatrice's testimony that she was threatened by Dulieri. In fact, she appeared to be a manipulator. Beatrice's daughter, Angelica, has come to her mother's defense, claiming that her mother's was not cruel or manipulative. She claims that her mother was abused by Dulieri, which proves that she could not have been complicit in the crime. According to Angelica, her mother's fell into a state of depression and fear, was forced by Dulieri to help hide the body and the evidence. During the hearings, Beatrice's former boss also testified. He denied having had an extramarital affair with her. However, he spoke highly of Beatrice, describing her as a reliable and professional employee. According to him, Beatrice was not manipulative, but rather gentle and never cruel. Later, Beatrice herself took the stand, offering lengthy and convoluted explanations filled with irrelevant details. A forensic psychiatrist analyzed her behavior, describing her as a frightened and desperate woman. She tried vehemently to defend herself, accusing everyone, including For's relatives, of neglecting him for years. She claimed that no one loved him as she did. This accusation outraged his family, who saw it as offensive. His mother calls her a bad person, willing to put others down just to avoid jail. The bitter confrontation between Beatrice and his family only adds to the tension. For's father, Robert, accused Beatrice of orchestrating the murder. He claimed that forensic evidence showed his son had put up a strong fight against his attackers. Robert firmly believed that Dulieri alone was not strong enough to overpower For, which clearly pointed to both perpetrators working together to commit the crime. Meanwhile, his mother highlighted Beatrice's supposed immoral behavior to the jury. Her remarks were so harsh that Angelica, Beatrice's daughter, lost her temper. Angelica's behavior became so outrageous that she was warned that she could be removed from the courtroom. Angelica also blamed Dulieri for manipulating her mother. Dulieri, however, claimed that Beatrice had manipulated him, leading him astray, and ultimately ensuring he ended up in prison for 30 years. Yet, his claim was not taken seriously, as the prosecutor's office was fully convinced that both Dulieri and Beatrice had acted together in committing the crime. The prosecutor then presented a crucial piece of evidence. According to them, Beatrice had conspired to murder. This was evidenced by the purchase of a new car, supposedly purchased by Four, but in reality, Beatrice is the buyer. The car was said to have been purchased in advance to facilitate the disposal of the body. With the new evidence, prosecutors have asked for Beatrice's sentence to be extended. However, her lawyer argued that she had purchased the car under duress from Dulieri, who had been planning to kill Four for some time out of jealousy. In her final statement, Beatrice maintained her innocence. She denied any involvement in Four's murder, stating that despite their conflicts, she had no motive to kill him. The trial lasted 3 days. After all testimonies and arguments were presented, the chief prosecutor requested a 30 years prison sentence for both Beatrice Frustieri and Jean-Claude Dulieri. The jury deliberated for over 4 hours before returning to the courtroom to deliver their verdict. They upheld Beatrice's 20-year sentence, reaffirming her guilt. The family Faure was disappointed once again, as they had hoped for a harsher punishment. Dulieri's sentence was also reviewed, though less extensively. His prison term was reduced by 5 years, despite objections from Faure's family. For the Dominique Ortiz case, Dulieri received a 20 years prison sentence to run concurrently with his other sentence. Beatrice and Dulieri were sent back to prison, but the exact roles they played in the crimes remain a subject of controversy. The case of Rachel Moran. Rachel Moran was born in Ireland in 1982, when she was only 6 months old. Her family moved to Hull, Humberside, UK. She is the youngest of 4 children, and was known to be well-behaved and studious from a young age. Rachel is passionate about music and dance, especially ballet. She often spends time with her family, although she has many friends. After graduating from high school, Rachel decided to go to medical school and start building her career. During this time, she met a younger man named Mark, and they quickly began dating. They soon decided to move in together, but Rachel requested that they live close to her family home so she could visit often. They found an apartment just a few miles away from her family home and rented it. At the age of 21, Rachel used her talent to join a dance group to earn extra income. She also worked part-time as a kindergarten teacher. One of her dreams was to become a chef, so she started baking to develop her cooking skills. At the end of 2002, she decided to further her education by enrolling in cooking courses that would help her achieve her dream. Her studies began in January 2003. During this time, Rachel was dating Mark. They considered marriage and having children but felt it was too soon. They wanted to focus on their education and careers first. On Tuesday, December 31, 2002, people across Great Britain were getting ready to celebrate the new year, including Rachel and her boyfriend. Mark suggested they go to a bar with friends on New Year's Eve, but Rachel preferred to stay with her family. Mark didn't want to join her, so they agreed that he would stay home to look after the 2 kittens they had just adopted. Rachel then went to her parents' house in North Hull Hold and spent New Year's Eve with her family. On New Year's Eve, Rachel called Mark to wish him a Happy New Year, but he didn't answer his home phone. She then tried calling his cell phone, but a close friend answered. There was loud music and partying in the background. The friend explained that he and Mark had gone to a party at home. Rachel was upset because this meant their kittens were home alone. Soon after, Mark's phone battery died. She wanted him to come back and look after the kittens, but since she couldn't reach him, she decided to go check on them herself. Her mother Wanda saw her leave and became worried, not wanting her to be alone at such a late hour, especially in bad weather and with people drinking on the street. Rachel convinced her mother to let her go out, promising to call Wanda in about 20 minutes when Rachel got back to the apartment. Her mother waited for the call, but when the 20 minutes had passed, she began to worry. First, she tried Rachel's cell phone, but it was turned off. Next, she called the home phone, but no one answered. Thinking that Rachel might have gone to find Mark, the Wanda managed to calm herself for a bit. However, as time went on, over 2 hours passed since Rachel had left home, and there was still no news. This was unusual for Rachel. The Wanda was increasingly anxious and jumped in surprise when the home phone rang. Unfortunately, it was her other daughter calling to wish her a happy new year. The Wanda shared her concerns, and they all tried calling Rachel again, but her mobile phone remained silent. When they called the home phone again, they noticed the line was busy. This was a small relief, as it indicated that someone was using the phone, suggesting Rachel had returned home safely. 5 minutes later, Rachel's mother called her back. Mark answered the phone and explained that he had been out all night. He had just returned to the apartment and was getting ready for bed after calling a friend. He had no idea that Rachel had returned to their home. Rachel was not at the apartment, and Mark did not notice anything unusual in the apartment except that the kittens were very hungry, which indicated that Rachel had not returned to feed them. This made Wanda extremely worried, and she feared that something terrible had happened to her daughter. Rachel's family quickly went to the apartment and confirmed Mark's story. Worried, they immediately went to the local police station to report Rachel missing. Police asked her family if this had ever happened before, but the Wanda was adamant that Rachel had never run away from home before, and that she did not have any mental health issues. She had kept away from people who could cause her trouble, so there was no reason for her to run away. After speaking with family members, the police recognized the seriousness of the case. Over 10 police officers joined the search operation, thoroughly examining every location along the route that Rachel was expected to take that night. Yet they still had no leads on what had happened. Police spoke with the last people who saw Rachel, including her mother and brother. The Wanda recalled a man who had passed by them as she stood at the door trying to convince Rachel not to go out so late. The man was walking in the same direction as Rachel, which led police to search for clues about a man while continuing to search for Rachel. The police interviewed Mark. They believed that on the night of Rachel's disappearance, there may have been a disagreement between them because Mark left the kitten home alone and went to a party without her. However, Mark denied this, saying that he did not see Rachel that night and that they did not have an argument. Although he believed that Rachel may have been upset, he insisted that he was not home on New Year's Eve and had been with friends the entire time. Mark was extremely worried about Rachel's disappearance and felt guilty for leaving the house, fearing that it would put her in danger. Mark still actively helped to search for her. His actions did not arouse any suspicion, and after verifying his alibi, all suspicions against him were cleared. After the police checked with people Rachel might have known, they did not find any suspicious people who could have staged the kidnapping or attack. Her friends were known to be trustworthy. Therefore, the police concluded that she had been kidnapped or attacked by someone she did not know well. After several days, the police did not see any activity on Rachel's bank cards and noticed that she had not used her mobile phone. A search of Rachel and Mark's apartment also yielded no clues. At the beginning of the investigation, police reviewed footage from city surveillance cameras to determine what happened on New Year's Eve. During the search, they analyzed the recordings and were able to track Rachel as she walked toward her apartment. This helped them pinpoint a specific area that was the route she may have been attacked, With this information, the search efforts focused on a smaller area. They deployed helicopters, dogs, mounted police, and a team of divers. This was a difficult time for Rachel's family, who still held out hope that she was alive. However, the actions of the search team showed that they were more focused on finding a body than a living person. On January 1, 2003, a dive team began searching a canal known for dumping waste. They discovered sneakers similar to the ones Rachel had worn at her mother's house. This prompted a more extensive search of the site. The divers discovered a woman's handbag. Inside the bag, they found Rachel's cell phone, a cosmetic case, and an Irish passport that belonged to her. The police believed that the objects found were intentionally discarded, indicating that someone wanted to ensure they would never be discovered. This led them to conclude that Rachel was likely no longer alive. Their suspicions were reinforced by the total lack of communication from the suspected kidnappers. No ransom had been requested, and they had not provided any information about Rachel to her parents. With very little information available, the police decided to retrace Rachel's last known movements. At the same time, they gathered details to share with journalists in hopes of generating public interest in the case. They provided thorough descriptions of Rachel's clothing, her photographs, and the route she was last seen taking, including the exact time and her home address. They hoped this would help attract the attention of anyone who might have noticed something unusual, especially in relation to the man described by Rachel's mother. Some of the witnesses at the police station on New Year's Eve were unfortunately intoxicated, which clouded their memories and made them unreliable, hampering the investigation. Meanwhile, the police had access to new surveillance cameras, one of which was located on a school building, just outside Rachel's usual route. The footage showed a silhouette resembling Rachel, placing her less than 200 meters from her apartment. Furthermore, she had changed her usual route. Instead of taking the well-lit central streets, she turned into the dark side streets of a nearby residential area. Then, in the video, a second figure suddenly appears and quickly approaches Rachel from behind. The footage does not show what happened when they met. It is possible that this figure was the criminal who attacked her. The police knew that murder victims were usually found within a few kilometers of the scene of the attack. Therefore, they decided to expand the search area to a 3-kilometer radius from Rachel's house. The search involved over 100 police officers, making it one of the largest operations ever conducted by the Humber Police. Every street was thoroughly searched, but no evidence was found. A crucial decision was made. The team would not only search the area, but also search homes within a 3-kilometer radius. Although the chances of finding Rachel alive were very low, on January 28, 2003, more than 100 police officers set out to search for Rachel. They formed small search teams. A few hours later, a member of a search team contacted the station to report that they had found a man's house just a short distance from Rachel's apartment. When the police checked the house, there was a man who claimed that he lived there with a friend. Their house was very dirty and untidy, and it seemed like he never cleaned it, because there was a foul smell inside. Initially, there was no sign of Rachel, but the police noticed a large wardrobe. When they asked the tenant for the key, he said that he had lost it. He then changed his story, saying that he had given the key to an old friend who used to live with him. After a while, his story changed again, and he said that he had given the key to his mother. The police found this strange. Why didn't the owner of the wardrobe have the key? It seemed like a lie and aroused suspicion. Finally, the police asked him to find the key. When the closet door was opened, a large amount of rubbish was removed, including carpets, boxes, bags, and other debris. After 4 weeks of searching, the mystery of Rachel Marin's disappearance was solved when her decomposing body was found in the closet, wrapped in bin bags. The apartment where her body was discovered was only 100 meters from her home. two young men who lived there were quickly arrested on suspicion of murder. One of them, 20-year-old Michael Little, was living as a homeless person, while his friend immediately denied any involvement, claiming that he had not used the apartment for a long time. He insisted that he had no idea there was a body there. His claim was backed up by the fact that he had moved to another location a long time ago and had never been to the apartment. Then attention turned to Michael Little. During the investigation, police discovered a suspicious notebook containing some disturbing notes, but his notes lacked specific details about any actual wrongdoing. Michael, the murder suspect, claimed that he saw Rachel walking alone at night and invited her to his house for a drink. Rachel was his neighbor, and they were friends. According to Michael, Rachel accepted his invitation. After they entered the house, Rachel and Michael drank and talked for a while, and then an argument broke out. Michael admitted that he tried to calm things down by leaving the room and leaving Rachel in the kitchen. However, when he returned, he saw her holding a knife, and she stabbed him with it. To prove this, he showed a long-healed scar on his hand. Frightened, Michael attacked Rachel, took the knife from her, and in a fit of rage killed her. He claimed that it was self-defense, but this argument seems unconvincing since his wound was much older. Police interviewed people close to Michael. Several witnesses revealed that he attended a party with friends that night, where he talked about confessing his love to a blonde girl he had feelings for. Most did not know who she was, but believed she likely rejected him. Michael left the party around midnight and said he went home. The police then traced Michael's route, which matched the area where Rachel had been walking. They also gathered a description of the clothes he was wearing that night, which matched the appearance of a stranger seen on surveillance footage running toward Rachel before she was murdered. Rachel's family believes that she could not have acted as Michael described. First, Rachel would never have gone to a stranger's house to drink. Second, she was desperate to get home to her kittens and would not have wasted time visiting someone she did not know. Rachel also did not drink, and most importantly, she would never have used a knife in a domestic dispute. Her family believes that Michael was lying. The police needed to establish that Michael's communication with Rachel was not voluntary. They had to prove he had either lured her or forced her to his apartment. To gather evidence, the police continued reviewing footage from the city's CCTV cameras. They had previously found a clip showing Michael walking in front of Rachel, but other videos revealed him approaching her from behind. This suggested that he had spotted her and may have hidden to ambush her, which supported the suspicion of kidnapping. Meanwhile, the autopsy results were in. The forensic expert determined that Rachel had suffered a brutal attack, with 27 stab wounds, primarily on the back of her head and neck. A large kitchen knife was used in the assault. She was likely attacked from behind, as there were no signs of defensive wounds on her arms or body. In Michael's apartment, police found the Rachel's blood, and dirt on her legs suggested she had been dragged through the grass. This pointed to the conclusion that the attack occurred on the street. He likely attacked Rachel and took her to his apartment. The autopsy revealed evidence of abuse. Despite the clear evidence of abuse, the prosecutor's office chose not to charge Michael with that crime. Instead, they charged him with premeditated murder. Michael often spent time by the window and had few friends. He watched Rachel every day as she passed by his house on her way to her parents' house. All of Michael's friends knew about his unusual fantasies and unhealthy obsession with Rachel, whom he constantly watched. According to Michael's friends, he would spend hours looking at her from the window and often mentioned her in conversation. Michael claimed to have a girlfriend, but everyone knew this was a lie. His imaginary girlfriend resembled Rachel in many ways. While he was in prison, his story changed again. He said that Rachel approached him on the street, asking him to walk with her to his house because she was afraid of getting into trouble. When they got to his apartment, they argued. She allegedly tried to attack him. prompting Michael to hit her on the back of the head. He then lost control and, fearing for his life, stabbed her to death. The story contradicted the evidence police had gathered. There was no reason to believe that Rachel, who barely knew him, would approach him or act aggressively. Police learned about Michael Little's personality. He was a troubled teenager who faced bullying at school. Overweight and socially isolated, he endured ridicule that had a profound effect on him. With virtually no friends, he interacted mainly with his younger sister, which also made him a target for ridicule. His father had abandoned the family, and Michael revealed that he had been abused by his stepfather throughout his childhood. The only people he had a good relationship with were his mother and sister. Michael grew up in several public housing apartments. Neighbors saw Michael spend most of his time at home using illegal drugs and frequently watching adult films. One of his classmates noted that when Michael was angry, he became aggressive and unpredictable, revealing his darker side, which often led to trouble. On January 31, 2003, 3-year-old Michael Little was charged with first-degree murder. He claimed that he acted in self-defense. He accused Mark Fuller, who had previously lived in the same house with him, of murder, although Fuller had previously been cleared of all suspicion. Michael claimed that Fuller's alleged motive was jealousy. He was angry that Rachel had taken a liking to Michael. Michael explained that his earlier confession to the murder was the result of threats from Fuller, who had threatened to kill him and his family if he did not confess. In court, Michael also claimed that he had been forced to clean up the blood and hide the body. This information needed to be verified. Fuller then underwent another round of questioning, during which he continued to maintain his innocence in Rachel's death. The police reviewed the evidence and confirmed that Fuller had an alibi. As a result, they were once again unable to charge him. Michael was trying to shift the blame to someone else. His lies ultimately strengthened the prosecution's case. The injuries on Rachel did not match the description he had given, in which he had always claimed that he was the victim of Rachel's attack. After both the prosecution and defense presented their cases, the jury deliberated for 9 hours. The jury then found Michael Little guilty of first-degree murder. A jury later found Michael Little guilty of first-degree murder. Michael was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. After Rachel's death, Ray Moran. Her father fell into a deep depression, while her mother began to suffer from health problems. Rachel's relatives believed that Michael had no remorse for his actions, as he tried to blame others for his crimes. The case of Roxanne Wood. The only evidence found at the crime scene was a drop of semen. It took 35 years for the victim's relatives to discover who brutally took the life of their loved one. Roxanne Woods was born on April 15, 1956, in the small town of Nels, Michigan. She was the first child in the family, followed by younger sister Janet. When Roxanne was 16, her younger brother Brad was born. Then their parents' marriage began to deteriorate. When Brad was 2 years old, her parents separated and filed for divorce. The children had to split their time between their mother's and father's homes. So Roxanne took on the role of caring for and comforting her younger siblings, Janet and Brad. Roxanne had a challenging life, but she was cheerful, friendly, and sociable as she grew up. After completing her studies at the age of 17, she started working as a manager at a small company that manufactured steel tanks, specifically in the customer service department. One day, a handsome young man came to the office. When she first saw him, Roxanne complimented him. Then they had a conversation. The young man's name was Terry Wood, and he was the boss's son. When Roxanne got home after work, she excitedly told younger sister that it was the happiest day of her life because she had met a wonderful boy and had fallen in love with him at first sight. Roxanne and Terry began dating, and 8 years later, in 1982, they got married. The couple settled into a home in their hometown of Nels, Michigan. Both worked as managers in the customer service department of Terry's father's company. Their daily routine consisted of waking up, having breakfast, and going to work together in the same office. They would return home for lunch, take a break, go back to work, and then come home together in the evening. Roxanne tells Terry that she feels suffocated by their constant togetherness. She believes that it is damaging their relationship, leading to boring arguments. The Roxanne left her father-in-law's company and found a job as a manager at a plastic parts manufacturer in South Bend, Indiana. The brief separation during the day helped her and her husband maintain their relationship, and everything was going well. They began to live a normal life together. In her free time, Roxanne enjoyed cooking and often baked a variety of sweet pastries. She also loved growing roses in their yard, as she appreciated creating beauty around her. 5 years passed, and during this time, the Roxanne family remained childless. The couple continued to live together, work and manage the household, unaware of the tragic fate that awaited them. On Thursday, February 19, 1987, Roxanne and Terry went to work as usual. In the evening, they each drove separately to a restaurant in downtown Niles to meet for dinner. After dinner, they decided to relax at a local bowling club with some friends. When Roxanne entered the club with Terry, she quickly attracted the attention of everyone around her because of her attractiveness and elegance. The couple enjoyed a night of bowling at the club, which was mostly filled with men. After 11 o'clock, Roxanne told her husband that it was time to go home because she had to get up early for work the next day. Terry wanted to stay and play one last round. Roxanne hugged him, kissed him, and said she was going home. Terry said goodbye and reminded her to drive carefully. Roxanne left alone while Terry stayed at the club to play one more round before driving home. He returned home about 45 minutes after Roxanne and assumed she was asleep. Terry parked his car in the garage and went into the kitchen. Terry witnessed a horrifying scene. His wife, Roxanne, lying on the floor in a pool of blood, her panties down to her ankles. Terry rushed to her side, hoping she was still alive. He lifted her head and tried to check her pulse, but quickly realized she was dead. In a panic, he rushed to the phone. He slipped on the bloody floor but managed to stay on his feet. He called the local police station and shouted into the phone, saying that his wife was dead in the house. Terry screamed and asked the police to come quickly, right now. The police asked Terry to calm down because they did not understand what he was saying. Terry's aggressive behavior on the phone was alarming, and when the police arrived at the Terry family home, Roxanne's death caused him to explode in rage, screaming uncontrollably. The police were forced to put him in the back of a patrol car and take him to the station for questioning. When they arrived, Terry immediately requested a lawyer, which raised further suspicions among the police. The autopsy revealed that 30-year-old Roxanne Wood had died from a stab wound to the neck. Forensic experts found only one piece of evidence at the crime scene, a drop of semen. In 1987, DNA testing had not been conducted, so the evidence was stored in the archives. During their search of the house, police found no signs of forced entry. Terry told police that they had a problem with the back door of their home, saying it was not working properly. Roxanne was found on the floor next to the kitchen cabinets, and the cutlery drawer was open. A fillet knife was missing, leading police to believe that it was the weapon used in the crime. Police found it strange that an intruder could enter the home without a weapon. When police looked into Roxanne's case, all information pointed to her husband, Terry, as the suspect. The investigation into the couple revealed that both Terry and Roxanne had been unfaithful to each other. When the police discovered this, they considered jealousy as a possible motive for the crime, especially on Terry's part. However, Roxanne's relatives did not believe Terry was capable of such violence. Although they acknowledged that he could be rude, yell, and insult others, they did not think he would commit such a brutal act. They believed that someone else was responsible for the crime. Despite their suspicions, the prosecutor's office determined that there was insufficient evidence to charge Terry with Roxanne's death. After the investigation, there were still no new clues, so the investigation was stalled. For many years, the case remained unsolved. Many Nelson residents blamed Terry for Roxanne's death. He was often cursed in public, with people calling him a beast and a monster. Despite this, Terry continued to live in Nelson, working for his father's company, keeping his personal life private and avoiding contact with journalists. A year after the tragedy, in 1988, Roxanne's younger sister Janet married Terry's brother, Robert Wood, who also worked at their father's steel tank manufacturing company. Janet and Robert were the only ones still actively searching for the criminal, even though the police had given up and believed the case would never be solved. In 1999, there was a significant development in DNA research related to the Roxanne Wood case, which had stagnated for 12 years. A DNA sample from the crime scene was added to the National DNA Database, but no matches were found. Terry, Roxanne's husband, agreed to provide his DNA for comparison, but it also did not match the sample from the crime scene. 20 years went by, during which a significant amount of information was gathered regarding the case. In 2020, police brought in a professor and a group of students from Western Michigan University to digitize the case materials and enter them into an electronic database. The students worked on roughly 3,500 pages of handwritten reports, notes, and other relevant information. The professor noted that after 30 years of collecting data, police may have overlooked important details during the investigation. Around the same time the students started digitizing the data, the police investigating Roxanne's case reached out to a company that specializes in genetic genealogy. However, a new issue arose. The semen samples from the crime scene were poorly preserved. The usable portion was only about 3% of the amount normally needed for research. They had never worked with such a small amount before. However, the researchers still tried to identify the criminal's DNA. The experts spent about 10 months on the project, but were ultimately unable to produce any results. Their efforts were in vain. The president of the genealogy company was very upset about the failure of the project. One day, the president of the genealogy company discussed this issue with his employee, Gabriela Vargas, and asked her to take over the project, promising to support its progress. In April 2021, Gabriela began her work. Colleagues considered Gabriela to be one of the most talented researchers in genetics. A few months later, Gabriela created a genetic profile using DNA analysis. She quickly discovered that the man was of Balkan Caucasian origin. Using the online service GetMac, Gabriela was able to build the criminal's family tree. Police identified the killer's parents, a couple born around 1920 who had 3 sons. This meant their sons were likely born in the 1940s and 1950s. With information from Gabriela, police quickly identified 3 brothers, eliminating 2 as suspects. That left only 1 brother, who had a significant criminal record. Michigan State Police believe they have finally identified Roxanne Wood's killer after 34 years, Patrick Gilham. In 2021, Patrick Gilham, 66, lived just a few miles from Roxanne Wood in South Bend, Indiana, where she also worked. Patrick was an alcoholic and a drug addict. When police looked into his criminal record, they discovered that 8 years before Roxanne was murdered, he had been charged with assaulting another woman. Back in 1979, a young mother named Maureen Farrick lived in Gary, Indiana, with her husband Robert and their 2 daughters, ages 3 and 2. Maureen was an art teacher at a local high school. Robert described his wife as beautiful, kind, and social, always ready to help others. In September 1979, as Robert's business trip was coming to an end, he planned to return home late that evening. He called his wife, informing her that he didn't have the house keys, and asked her to leave the side door unlocked for him. After 11 p.m., as Robert was walking home, he noticed several police cars parked near his house. Morin ran out and told him that a stranger had attacked her that night. She was sleeping on the second floor with her daughters when she heard noises coming from downstairs. Concerned, she decided to investigate and went downstairs to see what was going on. She noticed a man going through her purse. When he saw her, he pushed her to the ground near the stairs and tried to attack her, but he was unsuccessful. He eventually stole her purse and escaped. Morin remained silent throughout the incident, fearing that her daughters, who were sleeping on the second floor, would wake up. After the attacker left, she called the police and provided a description of him. About a week later, Patrick, 24, was stopped by police for a traffic violation. An officer noticed credit cards next to him that belonged to Morin Farrick. Patrick was arrested and taken to the police station. During questioning, he explained that he had entered Morin's house through an open side door and that he had stolen her purse. In 1979, Patrick Gillum was charged with burglary and unlawful deviant behavior. He pleaded guilty at his trial and was sentenced to 14 years in prison. However, he served only 7 years in an Indiana prison before being released on parole for good behavior. In 2021, police began searching for Patrick Gillum to collect a DNA sample to compare with the profile of the criminal in Roxanne's case. In May 2021, they found Patrick Gillum, 66, in South Bend, Indiana. While driving his pickup truck, he threw a cigarette butt out the window. Police took the cigarette butt, which contained his saliva, and sent it for analysis. A few days later, the test results did not match, surprising the police. They were certain that Patrick was involved in Roxanne Wood's case. They then decided to take another DNA sample from Patrick, suspecting that they might have accidentally taken the wrong cigarette butt. In July 2021, Patrick was under continuous observation. One day, he visited a laundromat, and a police watching him decided to wait nearby, believing Patrick would eventually come out. The police positioned himself on the sidewalk next to the laundromat. His prediction came true when Patrick stepped outside, lit a cigarette, and sat just a meter away from police, unaware that he was being watched. The police greeted Patrick and they exchanged a few words. After about 2 minutes, Patrick returned to the laundromat, leaving behind a cigarette butt. The police collected the cigarette butt with gloves, bagged it, and sent it for forensic analysis. The analysis showed a near 100% match, but the police decided not to immediately arrest Patrick. Instead, they planned to bring him in for questioning. Patrick was told that the police needed to discuss an old case with him. During Patrick's questioning, the police asked him if he knew anyone named Roxanne. He replied that he knew 2 people by that name. One was a stripper, and the other was an alcoholic. They then showed him a picture of Roxanne and asked if he recognized her. He said he had never met her. They showed him both old and new pictures, but he continued to deny ever seeing her. When the police informed Patrick of what had happened to Roxanne, he became anxious. His body tensed, his hands shook, and he slammed his hands on the table, seemingly hoping that the interrogation would end. Throughout the interrogation, Patrick maintained his innocence, often answering questions with phrases like, "He don't remember" or "He don't know." The interrogation lasted for 5.5 hours. Eventually, Patrick stated that he needed a lawyer and he was allowed to go home. 7 months later, in February 2022, Patrick was arrested at his home in South Bend, Indiana. Around the same time, nearly all local media reported on the reopening of this high-profile case. Following this, a woman contacted the police to share a story she had kept to herself for nearly 35 years. In the summer of 1987, just a few months after Roxanne Wood's death, Patrick attempted to attack another victim in South Bend. It was an evening when Rose Perel decided to water her garden. While she was outside with a hose, she heard a car drive by. A Chevrolet El Camino stopped near her house. Rose initially ignored it, but when she finished watering and turned to go inside, she noticed a man wearing a black baseball cap and a black beard getting out of the car and walking toward her. Rose sensed that the stranger intended to harm her, so instead of returning to her house, she ran to her neighbors for safety. Thankfully, they quickly opened the door and allowed her in. Trembling with fear, Rose called the police, but by that time, the unknown man had already disappeared. A few days later, while driving around town with her husband, Rose spotted the same Chevrolet El Camino parked at a gas station. There was nobody inside the vehicle. Rose's husband decided to keep watch over the empty car while she went to find a phone to call the police. When Rose returned, she found her husband confronting the stranger. Her husband held a gun and told him to stay put. The man was 32 years old, with dark hair and a thick beard. Rose asked him to show her his driver's license. She read out his name, Patrick Gilham. Rose and her husband then allowed Patrick to leave, but warned him that they would use force if he came near their home again. Rose then went to the local police station and reported her situation, also naming Patrick Gilham. She never saw him again and believes the police took no action. It wasn't until 35 years later that Rose recognized Patrick on the news and decided to share her story. She believes that if the police had taken her testimony seriously in 1987, the Roxanne Wood case could have been solved much sooner. In April 2022, Patrick's trial finally occurred. He did not confess to the crime and claimed he had no memory of the events. When Janet Wood spoke during the trial, Patrick appeared horrified as he looked at her. Janet and Roxanne resembled each other closely, leading some to believe that Patrick thought he was face to face with Roxanne, which frightened him. Ultimately, Patrick Gilham was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 19 years. All suspicion was cleared against Roxanne's husband, Terry Wood. Terry was emotional and confused, crying in the courtroom. For 35 years, he had been the prime suspect in his wife's murder, and now justice had been served. He continued to avoid the press and kept his private life private. Roxanne's family finally found peace. Her siblings Janet and Brad were relieved to learn the truth. Janet shared that after the trial, she had a dream in which she and Roxanne were walking near the cemetery gates. They were laughing and talking, as Roxanne told Janet that it was time for her to leave. She reassured her loved ones not to worry or cry, saying that she was fine.